Chapter 372. Dongqing Wudi didn't seem to hear Wang Tianzong's meaningful words. He kept smiling and moved forward leisurely. Wang Tianzong didn't look at Li Tianlan again. He walked side by side with Dongqing Wudi and chatted casually. One was the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State who influenced the national situation with the power of a clan. The other was the commander-in-chief of Zhongzhou State who had fought for many years, and whose influence covered the whole army. They didn't have a deep friendship, but they were not strangers either. When they walked together, they didn't feel embarrassed because they couldn't find a topic. Dongqing Wudi casually mentioned 2 military projects that the Dongqing clan was currently studying. Wang Tianzong said with a smile that he would go back and ask someone to sort out the relevant information. In a few words, the cooperation of the project had been finalized. 2 young couples followed behind them in silence. This strange scene was seen by more and more people, and everyone had a strange look in their eyes. The 2 big shots in Zhongzhou State were likely to fall out today. The 2 young heavenly sons who were about to win or even die. They were still talking and laughing together when the maneuver was about to begin? Such a scene was really a little strange. The position of the team maneuver was near the 3rd stand of the training ground. The Sky Academy once again set up the exaggeratedly huge screen. All the equipment was connected normally. Before the maneuver personnel entered, the screen was silently playing the internal scene of the maneuver area over and over again. The team maneuver had always been the most important part of the final maneuver, so the maneuver area was very large. It extended from the front of the 3rd stand and entered the edge of the dense forest behind the screen, which was equivalent to officially entering the maneuver area. The terrain of this area with a radius of about 2 kilometers was not complicated, but it was extremely rich, including dense forests, pools, undulating terrain, abandoned teaching buildings, and a dilapidated warehouse. When Li Tianlan walked to the 3rd stand, all the elites of the 2 academies who participated in the maneuver today stood in front of the big screen and carefully observed the situation in the maneuver area. Li Tianlan counted and slightly twitched the corner of his mouth. A week ago, when Gu Xingyun held a forum, it was confirmed that there were 12 teams participating in the maneuver. But today there were only 7 in the maneuver site. Among them were East Emperor Palace, Phantom Palace, 3000 World, and Jile Mountain. In other words, after he seriously injured Gu Qianchuan and showed the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, there were only 3 teams from the 2 academies who were willing to advance and retreat with Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan. They were destined to be a loyal force of the other party, and there was no possibility of them changing sides. I saw a few friends. I'm going to take a look. When he was about to walk to the 3rd stand, Wang Tianzong suddenly smiled. Wudi, see you later. See you later. Dongqing Wudi nodded calmly. The moment the 6 people were about to go their separate ways, Wang Shengxiao, who had been silent, suddenly reached out to Li Tianlan. You are very strong. He looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said, I'm probably not your match right now, but in today's maneuver, we still have a chance of winning. Be careful. Wang Tianzong paused. He did not turn around or speak. Li Tianlan looked into Wang Shengxiao's eyes. His eyes were very calm, and even had a trace of regret. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. He didn't feel bad for Wang Tianzong, but he didn't like him either. But somehow, he appreciated the next patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Perhaps it was because of the other party's frankness. Li Tianlan reached out and held Wang Shengxiao's hand. Wang Shengxiao's palm slightly tightened and he said calmly, I'm sorry for not being able to have a fair fight with you. I'm sorry for you and myself. But how can everything go well in Jianghu? From where I stand, I owe you an apology. From the standpoint of the Wang family of Beihai, I will do whatever it takes. He let go of his hand. You won't win today. Next year, I'll toast you a glass of good wine. He took Song Xiai and turned around without looking back. See you in the maneuver. Wang Tianzong moved forward in silence. Wang Shengxiao and Song Xiai followed in silence. If it weren't for the fact that our positions are destined to be hostile, he should be the kind of person you admire the most, right? Wang Tianzong suddenly broke the silence and said slowly. If his surname wasn't Li, wouldn't he be the kind of person you admire the most? Wang Shengxiao smiled. What a pity. Wang Tianzong said. Yes. Wang Shengxiao nodded. What a pity. The backs of the three people were getting farther and farther in Li Tianlan's sight. Li Tianlan calmly withdrew his gaze and looked at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi stared blankly at Wang Tianzong's back, without saying a word. He and Wang Tianzong talked a lot, but it seemed that they talked about nothing. From beginning to end, he never mentioned today's final maneuver. Wang Tianzong didn't mention it either. Obviously, Sword Emperor had made up his mind. When he, the giant of Zhongzhou State and the #1 person in the army headquarters, personally brought Li Tianlan to the maneuver site, Wang Tianzong still didn't intend to give him, the minister, any face. Since he had made up his mind, it was useless to say anything. Tianlan, don't be careless. Dongqing Wudi said slowly. Wang Shengxiao is not talking big. Li Tianlan certainly knew the truth of Wang Shengxiao's words. The combat capability of the invincible realm was not really invincible. Even if it was the real invincible realm, few people dared to say that they were really invincible. Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu, any one of them alone would not be his opponent. But today it was a team fight. Three geniuses with combat capability far beyond their realm joined forces, which might not be worse than the combat capability of the invincible realm. If this maneuver was really a maneuver that would be lost, Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan would have given up long ago. I understand. Li Tianlan nodded. The little guy from the Wang family of Beihai is not bad. Dongqing Wudi smiled. I don't mean his apology to you. I mean standing in his position, he can admit that he is not as good as you. With this kind of mind, he is much better than the little bastard of Kunlun City. Tianlan, I appreciate him, but in this maneuver, the enemy is clear. Don't hold back. How come? Li Tianlan smiled. He knew better than Dongqing Wudi what this maneuver meant for himself and the Li family. They won. From now on, the Li family would usher in a real opportunity to rise. If they lost, even if the Li family was not doomed, the situation would be extremely bad. This maneuver was key for Zhongzhou State, and also for the Li family. Otherwise, Li Tianlan would not have participated in this maneuver with the intention of destroying indiscriminately, knowing that he was likely to face the entire Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. If his surname is not Wang, maybe you will be good friends. Dongqing Rushi took Li Tianlan's hand and whispered, just like Lin Fengting, Li Beitian and others. Li Tianlan reached out and touched Dongqing Rushi's long hair, saying softly, how can there be so many ifs? The three of them walked to the #3 stand of the training ground under everyone's gaze. The stand was already full of people. People from all walks of Zhongzhou State who were qualified to appear here had already appeared. Li Tianlan saw several familiar faces, and they were all sitting very close to the front. There were enemies and friends. Zhuang Huayang, the principal of the Sky Academy. Zhong Yue, the top leader of Huating. Yi Fengcheng, the director of Huating Special Operations Bureau. Zhang Qi, the director of the Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters. Lu Shuyuan, the director of the Curtin Intelligence Department of Huating, the boss of the Blue Sky Group. Han Donglu, the chairman of the board of directors of Shengshe Group, and Han Xinyan. Zhang Holong, whom he had seen several times, sat between an elegant couple, smiling and waving at him. Lu Shuanghua, the intelligence organization of the Wang family of Beihai, sat quietly. Wang Zhaoyang, the commander of the Shadow Sting Force, the largest special forces in Zhongzhou State, looked serious. Li Tianlan also accidentally saw Wu Zhengmin, the new deputy prime minister of Zhongzhou State, who represented the cabinet to attend the final maneuver. Gu Xingyun, who was a little pale, sat in the center and looked at Li Tianlan with indifferent eyes. Political bigwigs, military strongmen, intelligence elites, patriarchs of wealthy families, and giants of special warfare. They gathered here. Li Tianlan also saw more people he did not know. Everyone came here with their own plans and purposes. Wu Zhengmin came here on behalf of the Zhongzhou State government. The principle of the Zhongzhou State party commanding the gun had not changed for hundreds of years. The gun naturally represented the army headquarters. Therefore, after the formal formation of the special warfare system, this system, which could be on the same level as the army headquarters but was more secretive, was directly responsible to the government. Wu Jingmin's appearance here meant that the government was always paying attention to the changes of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state. The presence of military generals here was not very welcome. These strongmen, who were destined to fight for talents with the special warfare system, did not seem to care much about the eyes of their colleagues in the special warfare system. The patriarchs of wealthy families came here for investment. Every team participating in today's maneuver was likely to become a behemoth that could control the situation of Zhongzhou state in the next 10 or even decades. A correct investment could often become the key to making one's family more prosperous many years later. Therefore, after the maneuver, these wealthy families would be the most active in contacting with the major teams. The intelligence elite sat here for a relatively simple purpose. In addition to finding out the talents they needed, the maneuver they watched was a kind of intelligence in itself. The special warfare system was a force that had to participate. Because the maneuver of the two academies was an internal affair of the special warfare system, Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou state, had to come even if he did not want to. When Dongqing Wudi walked up to the stands, everyone in the stands stood up to greet him. After all, in any case, Dongqing Wudi was the highest-ranking tycoon who attended the maneuver. He was the minister of the army headquarters, and the actual leader of nearly 5 million troops in Zhongzhou state. Although he ranked third among the 9 tycoons in Zhongzhou state, when the international situation was tense, the strength and power of this position were even above that of the prime minister. This was the real power to the extreme, and people could not help but respect and even awe him. Dongqing Wudi shook hands with everyone one by one, and introduced Li Tianlan to everyone at the same time. Everyone could feel Dongqing Wudi's seriousness and solemnity. So everyone looked at Li Tianlan with more and more complicated eyes. It was a kind of forcibly changed kindness, softness, and emotion. They all knew what would happen in today's final maneuver. If Li Tianlan could not defeat the joint forces of several heavenly sons, he was bound to be killed in the maneuver area. But if he won, he was very likely to face the sword of Sword Emperor and the killing intent of Kunlun City. No one was optimistic about Li Tianlan. He was a heavenly son. He was the most amazing genius in Zhongzhou state in recent decades. Despite his outstanding aptitude, he did not have a terrifying enough background. The Li family had made a comeback. But the Li family's current strength was still weak. Everyone thought that Li Tianlan would definitely die today, especially after learning that Dongqing Rushi also gave up participating in the maneuver. But now Dongqing Wudi directly overturned everyone's inner speculation. He took Li Tianlan to the stands and seriously introduced the heavenly son of the Li family to everyone. His intention and formality could clearly make everyone feel his firmness and determination. Combined with Zhou Yuanshan's transfer to Jiangzhou some time ago, everyone knew that the Dongqing clan had completely regarded Li Tianlan as the core figure in their future development. Zhou Yuanshan, Dongqing Qiuqi, and Dongqing Rushi were all operating around Li Tianlan. In the next few decades of development, the Dongqing clan had clearly regarded Li Tianlan as their new core. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City wanted to kill Li Tianlan. The military giants protected Li Tianlan to the death. No matter what the result was, at least Li Tianlan was no longer a heavenly son with only talent but no background. The Dongqing clan might be a little worse than Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai, but Li Tianlan was definitely stronger than Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan. So complementary. Dongqing Wudi finally walked to Gu Xingyun. His Highness the God of War of Zhongzhou state was pale, but at this time there was a strange cyan color on his face, as if he was trying to suppress his anger. He saw Dongqing Wudi introducing Li Tianlan to everyone meticulously. This was not the so-called useless effort. This was completely putting pressure on the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. The Dongqing clan had been vaguely supporting Li Tianlan before, but now they stood up completely and completely protected Li Tianlan under their wings. Killing Li Tianlan was bound to make a deadly feud with the Dongqing clan. It didn't matter what Li Tianlan's surname was. What mattered was that he would become the core of the next generation of the Dongqing clan. Just like Gu Hanshan's status in Kunlun City, and Wang Shengxiao's status in the Wang family of Beihai. If they killed Li Tianlan at this time, it was not surprising that the Dongqing clan would react. Gu Xingyun kept breathing deeply. His injury was far from recovering, and his chest was full of pain when he breathed. He silently gritted his teeth and looked at Dongqing Wudi in front of him. He was sitting. Dongqing Wudi was standing. So Gu Xingyan had to look up. The sunlight after the rain shone down from the sky and fell on Dongqing Wudi. His body was covered with medals issued by Zhongzhou State, symbolizing all the honor and courage of a soldier. The medals were shining in the sun, a little dazzling. Gu Xingyan narrowed his eyes, held Dongqing Wudi's outstretched hand, and said calmly, "Marshal, you are really different today." Indeed. Dongqing Wudi let go of his hand and sat casually beside Gu Xingyan. "I'm a little strange to myself, not to mention others. I even forget the origins of many medals. I'm like this. I'm afraid others have long forgotten, right?" Gu Xingyan slowly withdrew his palm, gently clenched it into a fist, and said with a smile, "How could it be? Zhongzhou State will definitely remember the achievements of Zhongzhou State. You are a hero, and Zhongzhou State can't forget it. I dare not forget it." "Hero?" Dongqing Wudi shook his head with a smile and handed Gu Xingyan a cigarette. "I don't like to be a hero. It seems that heroes are good-tempered, and can tolerate some clowns jumping around in front of them. I have a bad temper, and I think everyone knows that. But it turns out that even if some people don't forget my contributions, they forget my temper." Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyan with soft eyes. "Xingyan, do you think I've killed too few people?" His voice was very light, but his voice was like a line of soldiers piercing the midsummer sun, making all the people nearby who heard this subconsciously shiver. Zhongzhou State's god of massacre. How could he kill too few people? Gu Xingyan's body stiffened for a moment, and then he calmly said, "Marshal, you must be joking." Dongqing Wudi chuckled and quietly changed the subject. "How's your injury? You were attacked these days, and Zhongzhou State is very lively. I approved several documents about finding the murderer in the army headquarters. How about it? Do you have any clues about the murderer now?" Gu Xingyan's elegant and pale face did not change at all, but a cold light flashed in his eyes. He stared straight at Li Tianlan in front of him and said expressionlessly, "There are no clues for the time being, but I believe that no matter who the murderer is, he won't live long." At this moment, Gu Xingyan thought of the scene when Dongqing Wudi introduced Li Tianlan to everyone just now. Such a move was to put pressure on Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai. But wasn't this a kind of provocation? The Wang family of Beihai never retreated in the face of provocation. Was Kunlun City going to retreat? Why, today he was not the only one who came to the Sky Academy. There was also Li Shi hiding in the dark. Gu Xingyan straightened up, looked at Dongqing Wudi's eyes, and said blandly, "I guess he won't live past today." "Really?" Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyan's eyes for a long time, and then he asked lightly. Without waiting for Gu Xingyan's answer, he nodded directly to Li Tianlan and said gently, "Tianlan, you go first. Just focus on the maneuver and leave other things to me." Li Tianlan nodded and turned around gently. He seemed to be still in the same place when he turned around. But the next second, his whole body had appeared in front of the big screen under the high platform. Like a ghost. The clear afterimage dissipated in a scream. Gu Xingyan's face twitched again. Dongqing Wudi stopped talking and just quietly looked at the screen under the platform. By introducing Li Tianlan to everyone, he had shown his final attitude. This was also the last fight. Until now, Dongqing Wudi still hoped that this matter could end in the rules of balance and compromise. This was more in line with the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. He did what he could. But he didn't know whether the Wang family of Beihai could see the so-called overall situation. Kunlun City could see the overall situation, but it didn't want to care. Li Tianlan, who had grown up, almost made it lose its mind with fear. As for Wang Tianzong, he didn't want to see the so-called overall situation at all. Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State slowly walked up to the high platform before the maneuver began, and sat next to Gu Xingyan in the greetings along the way. Dongqing Wudi, Gu Xingyan, and Wang Tianzong. The three giants all looked calm but determined. Dongqing Wudi suddenly laughed at himself. He seemed to relax and slowly leaned against the chair behind him. Chapter 373. This is the second update. There was one update a minute ago. Don't miss it. 9 o'clock. The maneuver officially began. Zhuang Huayang, president of the Sky Academy, and Chen Songlin, president of the Deep Sea Academy, made the opening remarks of the maneuver on behalf of the two academies. Zhuang Huayang, dressed in a suit, held a microphone in his hand, smiled peacefully, but his eyes were full of worry. He looked at Dongqing Wudi, took a deep breath, and said slowly, "Everyone, first of all, let's welcome." Boom! The opening remarks of the maneuver were completely interrupted after just a few words. A deafening roar rang out without any warning, shaking the heavens and earth. A cannonball burning with black smoke and dragging waves of fire rose into the air in everyone's astonished gaze, and finally smashed into a teaching building of the Sky Academy. The seemingly old but extremely strong teaching building shook violently under the bombardment of the cannonball. Countless glasses were broken into pieces, and the whole building collapsed with smoke and dust in the loud bang. Dust flew everywhere. This shot was enough to explain one thing. The cannonball that smashed the whole teaching building was a real one. If this sudden shot fell on the stands, the consequences would be unimaginable. Countless people turned their heads subconsciously and looked around. What the hell is going on? Yi Fengcheng, the director of Huating Special Operations Bureau, who was sitting behind Dongqing Wudi, suddenly stood up. In his sight, an endless long line suddenly appeared on all the roads of the Sky Academy. The army in camouflage seemed to be pouring into the Sky Academy endlessly. Silence. They marched firmly toward the training ground of the Sky Academy. Yi Fengcheng was dazzled in front of him. He could not determine how many people there were in this army for a moment. 10,000? 20,000? Or 30,000? The dense army occupied every corner of the Sky Academy. Yi Fengcheng suddenly rose into the air, stood on a high place, and looked out of the Sky Academy. Boom! Another violent rumble rang out. The cannonball burning with black smoke once again smashed into the Sky Academy. This time, it fell near the training ground. The crowd was in a complete uproar. Yi Fengcheng, standing on a high place, also saw the other side of the river. In his sight, countless armored vehicles and tanks were neatly arranged by the river, and countless barrels were aimed at the Sky Academy. On the other side of the river, there were still soldiers getting out of the car and rushing into the Sky Academy along the bridge and road. Yi Fengcheng's heart sank. He was known as a madman, but at this moment his whole body was ice cold. Countless soldiers began to rush into the training ground. Everyone was armed to the teeth and armed with live ammunition. More and more soldiers rushed into the training ground. A row, a patch, a square formation. The square formation slowly moved forward, growing larger and larger. However, the formation was not chaotic at all. It was strict and orderly. Gu Xingyan looked at this scene in a daze. At this moment, because of his injuries, he could be said to be in the weakest state of his life. Weakness could naturally affect his mental state. At this moment, as he looked at the increasingly large phalanx of troops, he stood rooted to the ground, unable to speak for a long time. The Sky Academy finally reacted. The big screen that was playing the maneuver area switched directly to the scene of the entire Sky Academy. In an instant, everyone saw the scene inside and outside the Sky Academy. The army. Weapons. Other than the army, there were only weapons. More and more armored vehicles and tanks lined up along the river. Some soldiers even set up rocket launchers nearby. More and more soldiers seemed to have no end at all. They rushed into the Sky Academy like a raging tide and a big wave. A large number of people began to gather at the training ground. A small number of elites occupied the arsenal of the Sky Academy for the first time. The people who guarded the arsenal were naturally experts. But in the face of such a large number of Zhongzhou state troops, they could not react at all. When they were hesitating whether to take action, they were directly overwhelmed by the rushing army. The arsenal was completely lost. So more main battle tanks and armored vehicles rushed out of the arsenal than on the other side of the river, and rampaged through the entire Sky Academy. There was a buzzing sound in the base of the Sky Academy. Armed helicopters appeared at a low altitude and flew slowly. More advanced fighter jets rushed into the sky and rotated at a high altitude. Some professionals entered the missile center. In less than 10 minutes, the control of the launchable missiles in the Sky Academy had fallen into their hands. Boom! The third cannon sounded in the Sky Academy. The shell passed through the training ground of the Sky Academy and fell straight into the villa in the center of the academy. That was where Zhuang Huayang lived and worked. The whole villa exploded in an instant. In a mess, stones were flying everywhere, and the surrounding flowers and running water were completely gone. Zhuang Huayang did not panic or get angry. He held the microphone, and there was only amazement and a bitter smile on his face. But except for him, most of the people present were in a great panic and dignified state. This is the latest armor-piercing shell developed by the Dongqing clan. It has just served in Zhongzhou State for less than 3 months, and is given priority to the Border Praetorian Corps. Its code name is Wolf Smoke. Its explosive power is about 5 times that of ordinary shells, and the explosion range is about 3 times that of ordinary shells. With less than 200 wolf smoke shells, artillery fire can easily cover the entire Sky Academy. Tianzong, what do you think? In the panic, Dongqing Wudi's voice sounded unhurriedly. He was not asking Gu Xingyun. He was asking Wang Tianzong. In an instant, Wang Tianzong did not respond, but everyone who heard this sentence nearby looked at Dongqing Wudi in disbelief. Countless troops gathered under the stage, almost filling the entire training ground. As far as the eye could see, there was a dense army, with no end in sight. Dongqing Wudi looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. Wang Tianzong's expression was still calm. He just nodded and said, "It's okay." "I think it's okay too." Dongqing Wudi smiled and stood up directly in the front row. At the front of the square formation under the stage stood 4 fierce generals. The moment Dongqing Wudi stood up, the 4 stood at attention and saluted at the same time. Their eyes were so fanatical. Their voices were hoarse. Li Zhonghu of the Blood Battalion of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Sun Mengran of the Pegasus Battalion of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Wu Junyu of the Black Dragon King of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Guan Jingjia of the Wild Sand Battalion of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Their voices were high and loud, as if they were roaring from the depths of their souls. Almost everyone present had heard of their names. They might not be as famous as the 4 famous generals under Dongqing Wudi's command, but in their respective legions, they were well-deserved backbone generals. Dongqing Wudi looked at them silently. He took a deep breath and raised his hand to salute. In an instant, thousands or tens of thousands of troops under the stage raised their hands to salute at the same time. This was an indescribable power. Tens of thousands of people raised their hands at the same time, and there seemed to be a storm in the whole training ground. The air was oppressive and suffocating. Only tens of thousands of soldiers raised their hands and looked at their marshal with fanatical faces. Dongqing Wudi. Gu Xingyun finally reacted. His face turned red, and even a little purple in an instant. No matter what all this meant today, Dongqing Wudi mobilized troops into the Sky Academy and destroyed the maneuver of the special warfare system, which was tantamount to slapping Gu Xingyun in the face. His face was completely distorted in an instant. He struggled to stand up and pointed at Dongqing Wudi. "What do you want to do? Mobilizing the elites of the Border Control Corps without permission? Are you crazy? Do you know what you're doing?" "I don't know." Dongqing Wudi slowly turned around, and his eyes were full of mockery. "But I know what I want to do." He stood on the stage with a calm expression, but his voice shook the sky and echoed over the whole training ground. "I don't care what bullshit rules you have. Today I'm here and my army is here. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I don't want anyone to hurt the people I care about. The maneuver can continue, but Tianlan must be alive. Today, I'll make it clear that whoever dares to hurt Tianlan, I'll dare to kill him." His eyes swept over Gu Xingyun, Wang Tianzong, and even Gu Hanshan and Wang Shengxiao under the stage. Gu Xingyun trembled in anger. You want to commit treason. Bastard. You want to commit treason with the Border Control Corps? He suddenly looked at the square formation under the stage and said angrily, "Are you going to betray Zhongzhou State with this madman?" "Betray Zhongzhou State?" Dongqing Wudi's voice suddenly rose. He suddenly reached out and pulled his clothes, and all the metals flew directly into the sky. He reached out and pointed. The sword intent surged, and a metal suddenly lit up in the dim blue electric light. The national medal. More than 20 years ago, the Li family changed dramatically. Hung State and Annan State joined forces to invade Zhongzhou State. Li Guangtu died, and the 120,000 troops of the Border Control Corps were almost wiped out. In that battle, I took 6,000 people of the Border Control Corps to kill 10,000 Supermaster Army of Annan State, and 3 large mercenary groups. My 6,000 people. I had over 20 wounds on my body in exchange for this medal. He pointed his palm again, and another medal lit up. 19 years ago, an important person in Zhongzhou State who had a close relationship with Kunlun City committed treason and fled to Hung State. I personally led the team and went 800 miles into Hung State and finally completed the beheading task. In that battle, more than 1,500 people of the Thunderbolt Battalion died. I was in a coma for 3 months, in exchange for this medal of courage. 15 years ago, Night Spirit invaded Zhongzhou State. I personally took my brothers and dragged Sky Spirit, an invincible realm expert of Night Spirit, to a small town in Nanyuan. In the end, I got killed by the human emperor. In that battle, 800 people of the Border Control Corps became martyrs and became this medal of blood. 10 years ago, the rout of Rant's team lurking back to Zhongzhou State from Snow Country was exposed. The Black Dragon Army lost 2 divisions overnight and successfully supported Rant's team to return home. In that battle, the former commander of the Black Dragon Army, my brother Lin Yuetong, sacrificed himself to cover me. His body has not been found yet, so I got this Medal of Fortitude. 3 years ago, the 5 superpowers joined forces with Annan State to invade the border. More than half of the Thunderbolt Battalion was lost, and the Blood Battalion lost more than 8,000 people. The Border Control Corps collectively made first-class meritorious service, and the President personally awarded me the Red Star Medal. Dongqing Wudi's voice kept rising, echoing on the training ground like thunder. Every one of my 22 medals was exchanged with the lives of the Border Control Corps. I've been in charge of the Border Control Corps for more than 20 years, participated in 36 wars, and killed more than 100,000 enemies. What did I get in exchange for that? In exchange for hundreds of scars on my body, the sacrifice of tens of thousands of my soldiers, and these more than 20 medals. This is what the Border Control Corps and I have done for Zhongzhou State. Treason? Gu Xingyun, I and my soldiers are standing here now. Do you dare to face these medals and say that the Border Control Corps is going to commit treason? Gu Xingyun's lips trembled violently, and his face was livid. Kill. Tens of thousands of troops in the phalanx raised their guns at the same time and roared. Enough. Wang Tianzong, who had been silent, suddenly whispered. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong, who still looked indifferent. How many people? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. Not many. Dongqing Wudi said calmly. 40,000 people. Not many indeed. Wang Tianzong nodded. If I want to kill him, 40,000 people can't stop me. You can try. Dongqing Wudi sneered. 40,000 elites in the Qi-controlling realm. Most of them may have no hope of breaking through the ice-condensing realm in their lives, but you are the Sword Emperor. Can you really break the domain formed by 40,000 people at the same time? Are you forcing me to take action? Wang Tianzong looked at Dongqing Wudi. I'm just teaching you what the overall situation is. If you dare to move today, 40,000 people can appear here. In 3 days, 400,000 troops can appear in Mount Dibing. Even if I can't defeat your Beihai Corps, can I destroy your nest? 40,000 people can't stop you, but if you move today, the Dongqing clan will fight you to the end at all costs. Dongqing Wudi's eyes were calm and crazy. He looked at Wang Tianzong and said word by word. Even if my family is ruined. You're not afraid, so are they? Wang Tianzong's body seemed to shake, and then he sneered. Dongqing Wudi suddenly laughed wildly. He pointed to the 40,000 troops below the platform and laughed wildly. I believe in the strength of your Sword Emperor. But the 40,000 people here are all excellent soldiers who have risked their lives for Zhongzhou State. They stand here today. Even if they don't move, Wang Tianzong, you can kill them all, but how many do you dare to kill? The Sword Emperor drew his sword and slaughtered the soldiers of Zhongzhou State. He might still be the Sword Emperor, but he could never be the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State again. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes tightly and remained silent. Dongqing Wudi didn't wait for others to test his determination. He suddenly turned around, looked at the platform below, and said in a loud voice, "I'm Dongqing Wudi, your marshal, but what I say now is not an order. Now I need someone to stand here and die for me. Who dares to die in the Border Control Corps?" The silence lasted only a few seconds. The next moment, 40,000 people raised their guns without hesitation and aimed at Wang Tianzong. Their eyes were fixed on Dongqing Wudi, the invincible marshal in their hearts. It was a kind of almost irrational fanaticism and madness. "I'm willing to die for the marshal." The uniform roar went straight to the sky, and the wind and clouds changed color. At this moment, in the face of the killing intent and will of 40,000 people, even the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State seemed to have no momentum at all. Gu Xingyan slowly slumped into his chair. His face was livid. He gritted his teeth and said, "Dongqing Wudi, you broke the rules. You must pay the price." "Bah." Dongqing Wudi spat at Gu Xingyan and said with a grim smile, "Fuck you." Chapter 374. Everyone knew that this final maneuver would not end peacefully. However, no one could have imagined that the scene would be so explosive. He was willing to die for the marshal. This was not a slogan. This was the soul of the entire Border Praetorian Corps. No one would doubt their determination. As long as Wang Tianzong dared to draw his sword, 40,000 people, 40,000 of the most elite troops of the Border Control Corps, would definitely charge at the so-called Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, without hesitation until all of them died in battle. The standing minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, the governor of Kunlun City, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the first time that the three giants, who could be said to be standing at the peak of Zhongzhou State, put their conflicts in front of everyone so fiercely. The three of them seemed to have no way out. But once they took another step forward, they would truly fight to the death. No one was willing to bear the consequences. Wang Tianzong looked at Dongqing Wudi quietly. Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyan with a ferocious smile. Gu Xingyan looked at Wang Tianzong with a livid face. The situation was subtle and deadlocked. The others sat in their seats with cold bodies, not even daring to breathe. No room for negotiation? After a long time, Wang Tianzong took the initiative to break the silence. "What do you think?" Dongqing Wudi glanced at him. His expression had already become calm, but his eyes still flickered with an extraordinary divine light. As the standing minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, he naturally had the power to transfer troops. But he transferred 40,000 of the most elite soldiers from the four armies of the Border Control Corps to Huading and directly surrounded the Sky Academy. While declaring force, Dongqing Wudi also mercilessly trampled on the rules. No matter what the result was, Dongqing Wudi had to pay the price afterward. He had taken a huge risk to get to this point. What other choice did he have? Wang Tianzong's eyes swept over Dongqing Wudi and fell on the endless 40,000 troops under the platform. The army stood motionless in absolute silence. Wang Tianzong looked at them one by one. From their eyes, he saw only unshakable toughness and persistence. A soldier should be like that. Such was the spirit of a soldier. The Border Control Corps was known as the most elite large corps in Zhongzhou State. And these 40,000 people could be said to be the most elite in the entire Border Control Corps. 40,000 soldiers, the weakest of whom were in the chi-controlling realm. Dongqing Wudi was right. Wang Tianzong was invincible in the world and ranked first on the divine list. He could kill 40,000 people. It could be killed. But he didn't dare to kill them. Sword Emperor's sword was aimed at the most elite warriors of Zhongzhou State. Even if he only killed one person, under the watchful eyes of the public, it was treason. Absolute martial strength, deep foundation, and super strength could represent many things. But it couldn't really replace everything. Even Wang Tianzong had to abide by the rules. If he made a mistake, he had to pay the price. If he pulled out his sword today, Li Tianlan would definitely die. But in the face of the counterattack of the entire 40,000 troops, Wang Tianzong could not leave Huading unscathed without killing a single person, even if he was an immortal. If it really came to that, the Dongqing clan which had already announced in front of everyone, would have no way out. While announcing the Wang family of Beihai's treason, the Dongqing clan was bound to mobilize all its troops to fight the Wang family of Beihai to the death. The Border Control Corps faced the Beihai Corps. The internal strife in Zhongzhou State and the civil strife in Eastern Europe would take the opportunity to cover Zhongzhou State, and the overall situation would collapse. At that time, the Dongqing clan would be ruined, which was the price the Dongqing clan had to pay regardless of the overall situation. But at that time, even if the Dongqing clan was destroyed, the Wang family of Beihai would not be much better. The Wang family of Beihai might become the next Li family, even more tragic than the Li family in those days. Wang Tianzong had a headache. At this moment, he finally found that Li Tianlan had become one of the most sensitive figures in Zhongzhou State. He affected the Dongqing clan. But the Dongqing clan could affect the general trend. Dongqing Wudi's strength was insignificant in Wang Tianzong's eyes. With his aptitude, it was not difficult for him to enter the invincible realm. But as he just said, over the years, countless wars and countless serious injuries had already worn out Dongqing Wudi's potential. The potential that was enough for him to enter the invincible realm had turned into more than 20 medals. Now Dongqing Wudi was in the half-step invincible realm. With Wang Tianzong's strength, he could kill him with one sword stroke. The problem was that Dongqing Wudi's strength was insignificant, but his identity made even Wang Tianzong feel pressure when facing him. He was one of the 9 directors of the Zhongzhou Decision-Making Committee, ranked 3rd, and the standing minister of the army headquarters. He was the actual supreme leader of millions of troops in Zhongzhou State, including the Navy, Army, and Air Force, plus the Special Forces. If it was during the war, Dongqing Wudi's power could be said to be second only to the president. He was the real number 2 figure in Zhongzhou State. Even in peacetime, his status was second only to the president and the prime minister. Kill him with one sword stroke. No matter how crazy Wang Tianzong was, he would not have such an idea. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and glanced at Gu Xingyin calmly. He had already begun to calculate the consequences of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, joining hands to make all the contradictions break out. If the two families really joined hands, it was not difficult to suppress the rebound of the Dongqing clan with absolute strength. Even if he killed Li Tianlan today and even fought his way out of the siege of 40,000 troops, the risk of the collapse of the Wang family of Beihai had been minimized with the support of the Special Warfare Group and the Southeast Group. If the two sides could really trust each other and join hands, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City would definitely take out a lot of bargaining chips to calm the anger of the whole Zhongzhou state. The Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group would be badly hurt. Some of the core technologies of the Wang family of Beihai would even be forced to open up. Even the control of the Beihai Corps would be given up by Wang Tianzong. As the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, he was likely to face more than a few years in prison. All this might be exchanged for the complete destruction of the Dongqing clan and the complete disappearance of the Li family. Was it worth it or not? Wang Tianzong looked at Gu Xingyun, trying to find a tacit understanding with him. Dongqing Wudi was also looking at Gu Xingyun. His look was flat and indifferent. He could think of what Wang Tianzong thought of. However, Wang Tianzong faced a huge temptation. He imperceptibly lowered the risk that the Wang family of Beihai would completely collapse after the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City joined hands. But no matter how low the risk was, it still existed. Dongqing Wudi had no way out. He was going to protect Li Tianlan today. If Wang Tianzong really dared to take action, no matter who he cooperated with, Dongqing Wudi would make him regret it for the rest of his life. Marshal Dongqing is too sensitive. Today is a normal maneuver. It's a competition between young trainees. Win or lose, life or death, and it's up to fate. I agree with you. No one outside the maneuver can interfere with the result of the maneuver. In an embarrassing silence, Gu Xingyin gritted his teeth, his face was livid, and he expressed his attitude word by word. No one spoke. But everyone who heard his statement was shocked inside. What he said couldn't be more obvious. Kunlun City had given up the plan against Li Tianlan. At least it gave up the plan against Li Tianlan in this maneuver. No matter what the result of the maneuver was, Li Tianlan would no longer face the pressure of Kunlun City. That's the best. Dongqing Wudi said indifferently. Wang Tianzong's eyes returned to calmness. Gu Xingyin kept taking deep breaths and clenching his fists. His body seemed to be trembling imperceptibly. Didn't he know that the Special Warfare Group and the Southeast Group had a great chance of winning? But he really couldn't afford such a big gamble. The strength of the Special Warfare Group was not weak. But Gu Xingyin was not as good as Wang Tianzong. A sword emperor of Zhongzhou State who was still at his peak might be able to break out of the encirclement after killing Li Tianlan. But once Li Tianlan died, a seriously injured god of war of Zhongzhou State would surely die without a whole body. Gu Xingyin had to give up the plan. He didn't want to let Li Tianlan go. But he didn't want to die either. Headmaster, what do you think? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and suddenly glanced at Zhuang Huayang. I agree with His Highness Gu Xingyun. Zhuang Huayang smiled and said, the final maneuver is a normal competition. Anyone outside the maneuver who tries to interfere with the result of the maneuver is equivalent to destroying the future situation of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. His attitude was clear. But it was just a clear attitude from the position of the headmaster of the Sky Academy. But everyone knew what Wang Tianzong was asking. Zhuang Huayang was one of the big shots of the academics. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State was the current leader of the academics. Dongqing Wudi transferred troops into the Sky Academy without permission. President Li Huaqing was the most powerful figure, who had the most reason to hold Dongqing Wudi accountable. Wang Tianzong looked at Zhuang Huayang. Zhuang Huayang smiled faintly and kept his composure. The attitude of the academics was subtle, but it was obvious that they didn't want to give up the relationship with Li Tianlan. They wanted to keep Li Tianlan, but they didn't want to take too much risk. Therefore, the academics only vaguely expressed a certain degree of support for the Dongqing clan. Of course, it was only a very subtle support. The president couldn't completely stand behind Dongqing Wudi to support him, at least not now, because there was no clear result of all these conflicts. The president was now visiting abroad. When the maneuver of the two academies was over, and everything was settled, he would come back to clean up the mess. At that time, if the Dongqing clan couldn't hold on, then the implicit support of the academics would naturally disappear, and the president would stand in the position of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai to suppress the Dongqing clan. But if the Dongqing clan could continue to be strong, then the implicit support of the academics would become real support. President Li Huaqing personally expressed his position, and Dongqing Wudi's private transfer of troops would be reduced to a small matter. Of course, no matter how this matter was reduced to a small matter, the Dongqing clan would hand over the leadership of the entire Border Control Corps. Repetition, capriciousness, cooperation, betrayal, deal, balance, compromise, all the words combined in the general trend. In fact, there was only one word: politics. Wang Tianzong took a deep look at Zhuang Huayang and slowly sat in his seat. The Sword Emperor never lowered his head. So he didn't speak. His meaning was obvious. He wouldn't take action now, but he still didn't give up the plan to kill Li Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes. He moved his body, stepped on the railing, crossed the air, and landed directly in front of Li Tianlan. The 40,000 troops turned around at the same time, and their eyes fell on Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan and Dongqing Wudi looked at each other. There was no emotion or joy in his eyes, but there was a kind of look that Dongqing Wudi wanted to see the most. It was an indescribable intimacy. Li Tianlan's heart was unprecedentedly agitated. He heard Dongqing Wudi's declaration that shocked the whole audience. He heard the 40,000 troops' hot-blooded and heroic oath to die at the same time. That was the Dongqing clan's most frank and truest attitude. It was the greatest kindness. That kind of kindness wrapped around him so tightly that he almost couldn't breathe. It was not until this moment that Li Tianlan realized that his so-called hesitation and uneasiness were actually illusory. When the Dongqing clan really stood in front of him at all costs to block all the wind and rain, he had no choice but to accept all this. All the protection and all the responsibilities. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't say anything. He could only bow deeply to Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi reached out to hold Li Tianlan. He pointed to the 40,000 troops behind him and said calmly, You don't owe the Dongqing clan anything. But you owe them. Yes. Li Tianlan nodded, raised his hand to salute the 40,000 most dedicated and fanatical elite soldiers. The 40,000 people raised their hands to salute back at the same time. It was a silent and depressing picture, but also extremely restless and fanatical. It was silent, like a kind of inheritance. I will give everything back to the Dongqing clan. No matter what you will lose today, Marshal. Li Tianlan put down his arm and looked at Dongqing Wudi's face, which looked a little young because of its cleanliness. As long as I am alive, the Dongqing clan will never be dimmed in the future. His face was solemn. This is my promise. This shouldn't be your promise. Dongqing Wudi's expression was complicated. He patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and whispered, "It should be yours." He paused and didn't go on. He just chuckled and said, "Come on, maneuver. As long as you can win. The Li family will completely usher in a new life today. Everyone participating in today's maneuver is your enemy. Come on. No matter what situation you are in, outside the field, tens of thousands of people's eyes will be watching you." Li Tianlan nodded. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyan also appeared in front of Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan. "Dad, don't worry." Wang Shengxiao looked calm and firm. "I will do whatever it takes." Wang Tianzong nodded and said calmly, "Be careful. Destroy him." Gu Xingyan stood in front of Gu Hanshan and said in a hoarse and cold tone, "What's wrong with letting him live? Destroy him completely today. You must do it." "Don't worry," Gu Hanshan whispered. "We can do it." This was also their confidence to participate in the final maneuver. After all, Li Tianlan was alone, and what he would face was the joint efforts of several teams. What Li Tianlan didn't know was that after he showed his invincible realm combat power, within a few days, Gu Hanshan had broken through from the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking realm to the peak of the Thundershocking realm. And Jiang Shangyu, who had been suppressed in the Fire-Flaming realm for 3 years, also directly broke the realm. With the accumulation, he rushed to the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking realm in one fell swoop. When the three of them joined forces, they were definitely not weaker than Li Tianlan. Even if Li Tianlan had the invincible realm combat power, the three of them joined forces to win more than 60%. The three giants returned to the stands. Gu Xingyan waved his hand at Zhuang Huayang, signaling the start of the maneuver. Zhuang Huayang, who originally wanted to make an opening remark, suddenly didn't know what to say. He held the microphone, hesitated, and finally smiled, waved his hand, and said directly, "The maneuver begins." Maneuver content. Strength is respected. Everyone entered the maneuver area at the same time. There were no rules and no time limit. Everyone hunted freely with their own means. The individual, and the team that won in the end would be the first place of this team maneuver. A maneuver content without the slightest reason. All the trainees silently entered the dense forest on the edge of the maneuver area from different directions. Li Tianlan's heart was like a raging fire, but his face was as cold as ice. He entered the maneuver area. For a moment, almost all the cameras were capturing Li Tianlan, because he was the only villain in this maneuver. Li Tianlan's figure, standing quietly, appeared on the big screen. The maneuver area was very large. There were roads all around him, and there were no enemies. To the left? Or to the right? Under the gaze of all the people on the high platform, Li Tianlan reached out and casually broke a branch on the tree next to him. He held the branch in his hand. His posture was like holding a sword. The next moment, all the people on the high platform suddenly stirred. In the uproar, not only Gu Xingyan, but even Wang Tianzong suddenly stood up from his seat. Chapter 375. Li Tianlan didn't know how many people were watching this maneuver. Those who were at the scene couldn't be there because of other things, but they still paid attention to this place, as well as other forces outside Zhongzhou State. This could be said to be the most boring maneuver since the establishment of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. But it could also be said to be the most widely watched maneuver since the establishment of the two academies. In the past, the team maneuvers were all exciting from the beginning. Alliances, cooperation, betrayal, conflicts, battles, dozens of teams, all kinds of plots were constantly staged. The maneuvers were always changing at a fast pace. It was difficult to guess the real result until the last moment. But this maneuver was completely different from the past. This was the one with the largest number of teams abstaining from the maneuver, the one with the fewest participants, and the one with the simplest and clearest positions of the students. There was no multi-party game in this maneuver. There were only friends and enemies. Dozens of teams in the two academies, most of them abstained. Only 7 teams participated in this maneuver, with a total of 106 people. East Emperor Palace, Phantom Palace, 3000 World, Gile Peak, Blizzard Elite and Giant Whirlpool. The 6 teams had a total of 105 people. East Emperor Palace had only 1 person. Between friends and enemies. Such a contrast meant that this maneuver would either have the highest death rate in previous maneuvers, or the lowest death rate in previous maneuvers. In the team maneuver, each person had 10 credits. Abstaining, serious injury, and death were all credits. If Li Tianlan alone defeated everyone, the accumulated credits plus the 2,000 credits of the first place in the maneuver would be more than 3,000 credits. These credits would be counted in East Emperor Palace, and eventually exceed the sum of all the credits of the other 3 forces of the young generation. At that time, the final maneuver would end early. In other words, the competition for the first place in the maneuver would end early. This was indeed a very boring thing. But boredom was also worth paying attention to. Everyone was concerned about the grievances between the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City, and the Li family. They were concerned about the life and death of several young heavenly sons in Zhongzhou State. They were concerned about the turmoil after the Giant Group, the Southeast Group, and the Special Warfare Group completely fell out with each other. They were concerned about the potential of several young people, who would become the peak combat power of Zhongzhou State 20 years later. This maneuver was boring, but it was exciting enough. Li Tianlan could almost feel the pairs of eyes falling on the big screen outside the maneuver area. Behind those gazes were enemies, friends, possible investments, and uncertain murderous intents. If he could defeat the 6 great teams today, he would have the qualifications to obtain a higher status than everyone else in the 6 great teams combined. The Li family was still there. Li Tianlan, who had shown enough strength and the strong support of the Dongqing clan, would bring real confidence to countless people. At the very least, he would no longer be the young man who only had potential but no support in the eyes of others. Behind him was the Dongqing clan. From the moment the 40,000 elites of the Border Control Corps rushed into the Sky Academy, Li Tianlan knew that the future of the Dongqing clan, like the future of the Li family, would become his responsibility. He couldn't escape and he couldn't. He had to carry the Li family and even the entire Dongqing clan with his sword. He knew his sword would. But the others didn't know. Therefore, in this maneuver, Li Tianlan wanted the whole world to see his sword. A sword was a sword. There was nothing to hide. The dense forest in the maneuver area was extremely quiet. This area was very large, but there were very few participants. It was difficult for people who entered the maneuver area from different directions to gather at once. Students participating in the maneuver were allowed to bring cold weapons into the field, but they were not given any firearms, ammunition, or communication devices. All the weapons and communication devices were scattered in the maneuver area. The weapons were taken by themselves. Not long after Li Tianlan moved forward in the woods, he saw a sniper rifle and a few bullets casually thrown on the grass. Li Tianlan didn't even bother to look at it. He stepped on the sniper rifle and continued to move forward. The maneuver of the 2 academies was still carried out according to the previous ancient rules. But the students participating in today's maneuver were all real experts and elites. Few of them could use guns. And they were dealing with Li Tianlan. At Li Tianlan's level of strength, only a few special weapons and ordinary high-power sniper rifles could pose a certain threat unless the muzzle was pointed at Li Tianlan. Less than a dozen meters ahead, Li Tianlan found a military multi-channel communicator. The communicator was on. Li Tianlan adjusted several channels. After getting no news, he crushed it. He stood where he was and began to think about what he would do if he were Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan. The maneuver area was too large for people to gather for the time being. Although communication equipment could be found on the ground, It was difficult to contact each other through multiple channels. The most important thing to do was naturally to gather. Everyone had seen the environment of the maneuver area on the big screen. The woods, the pool, the warehouse, and the teaching building. The jungle environment was similar, so the gathering place couldn't be here. The pool was in the forest, neither too big nor too small. Even those who were familiar with the Sky Academy could not locate it accurately for a while. Only the teaching building and the warehouse, which were next to each other, were located in the center of the maneuver area, which was the easiest place to locate. The most likely gathering place of the 6 teams could only be the warehouse and the teaching building, which were almost next to each other. The other side had an absolute advantage. Gathering people together first, distributing communication equipment, and completing the grouping, spreading out to search with the warehouse and the teaching building as the center was the most reasonable arrangement. It could even be said that it was the only arrangement that could be done. Li Tianlan looked around and suddenly smiled. The jungle was very dense, and the surrounding environment was almost the same. Only the sun in the sky could distinguish the direction. Judging from the scale of the maneuver area, it would take at least 2 hours for the other side to gather everyone together again. At this time, Li Tianlan could almost walk through the entire maneuver area alone. Li Tianlan gently raised the corner of his mouth. He shook the branch in his hand to the sky. The gently swaying branch appeared on the screen in front of stand number 3, almost occupying the entire screen. The uproar on the stand had not dissipated. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyin stood expressionlessly, looking at the screen in front of them. Beside them, Dongqing Wudi suddenly laughed wildly after a brief surprise, baring his teeth and brandishing his claws. Everyone was looking at the screen. Everyone, including the 40,000 elite soldiers, looked as if they had seen a ghost. Everyone saw Li Tianlan's sword, even his invincible realm, and his road to the Chosen One. From this moment on, the name of the Chosen One seemed to have become really undisputed. The premise was that Li Tianlan could survive. Wang Tianzong slowly sat down, his face silent. He found that he had underestimated the young man after all. The big screen was divided into countless small screens. There were figures flashing on each small screen. Wang Shengxiao was rushing forward. Gu Hanshan was charging forward with all his strength. Li Tianlan was also moving forward quickly. Everyone was charging in the same direction. What was reflected on all the small screens was a tense and silent picture. But all of this lost its meaning in Wang Tianzong's eyes. In his eyes, this high-profile maneuver. From the moment Li Tianlan stepped into the maneuver area, from the moment he broke off the branch, the outcome was already doomed. I'm really stupid today. Really? I'll write less today. My mind is in a mess, and I'm in a bad state. I've stayed up late for more than 2 months. I feel that I need to adjust my schedule. Chapter 376. The dilapidated warehouse and the abandoned teaching building were hidden in the middle of the dense forest. It was rarely visited, and it was eerily quiet. This was the first teaching building and warehouse of the Sky Academy when it was first established. Later, as the 2 academies recruited more and more people, the teaching building and dormitory area of the Sky Academy were constantly expanded, and the location was also changed. When Zhuang Huayang became the headmaster, this place was officially abandoned, and the whole area nearby was also isolated by the forest, becoming one of the candidate areas for the 2 academies team to perform. It had just rained. The sun on the horizon shone through the shadow of the dense forest. The dense forest was very dense, so the sunlight in the forest looked like a belt of light all over the dense forest. The rain and dew in the forest had not dried up. The rain and dew on the grass and treetops slowly slid down and fell to the ground. The sound was soft and a little dull. There was no sound of insects in the forest, and it was silent. He carefully moved forward in the forest. All the vague sword intent covered his whole body, and only occasionally a faint blue arc of light flashed on his body. In front of him, the gap between the trees was getting wider and wider. He walked carefully, and the warehouse and the teaching building had already appeared in front of him. He took a deep breath gently. Instead of relaxing, his face became more cautious. He looked back at the road he had walked all the way. The forest was a little wet after the rain last night, but he left no footprints along the way. But some of the exposed grass was destroyed and fell to the ground. He frowned and flicked his fingers. There was a sound of ice freezing in the air. The ice that suddenly appeared was very thin, and it turned into some water droplets in an instant. The water droplets fell evenly on the grass behind him. The water vapor was dense, and there were raindrops on the grass. He watched quietly until he could not find any traces of his passing, and then he was relieved. The teaching building and the warehouse in front were still quiet. He lowered his body and moved faster, but his movements became more cautious. He began to charge forward. Ice and fire bloomed around him at the same time. The raindrops on the bushes and treetops dripped down as he moved forward, and were immediately replenished by the dew formed by the ice cubes. Along the way, he did not leave any traces behind him at all. He moved forward 500 meters. The forest became sparser, and the warehouse and the teaching building became completely clear. The forest also came to the edge. The vigilance in his eyes did not fade at all, but became clearer. He did not know what was in the warehouse and the teaching building ahead. It might be one of his own, but it was also possible that they were enemies. He only had one enemy, but it was so powerful that he had nothing to say. In this extremely intense but simple maneuver, as the side with more people, the meaning of the warehouse and the teaching building was self-evident. This was the best and easiest rendezvous point. But their enemy, the enemy who was only 22 years old, but already had invincible combat power. With his strength, he had no doubt that the enemy would not have the courage to rush here directly. He stopped and began to move horizontally at the edge of the forest, carefully observing every area and every tree. A scratch suddenly appeared on one of the thickest trees nearby. There were a few small spots below the scratches. His brows furrowed, and his entire body relaxed. This was a team maneuver of more than 100 people against one person. Under the circumstance that no communication equipment was allowed, everyone entered the field in different positions. Before a complete communication network was established, their team advantage was actually not great. It could even be said that they were fighting on their own. Without any equipment that could communicate at any time, some simple markings became the most efficient method of communication. There were 4 types of signals. It was simple. A scratch represented a leader. A simple point represented an ordinary elite. A question mark meant that no target was found. An exclamation mark meant that the target had appeared in the marked position. Now what appeared on the tree trunk was a scratch with 6 dots. Their appearance here completely showed that a leader and 6 elites had already assembled in the teaching building and warehouse area ahead. There were only 3 so-called leaders in this maneuver: Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu. The others were all ordinary elites that could be represented by 1 point. Now one of the 3 leaders had arrived at the rendezvous point ahead of the 6 elites, but there was no battle. This was almost the first step for them to integrate the advantages of the team. He chuckled softly. His entire body relaxed as he subconsciously took a step forward. What do these symbols represent? A voice suddenly sounded, soft and gentle. This voice was so abrupt and so close that it almost sounded in his ear. In a situation where he was not mentally prepared, this voice carried an incomparably strong sense of horror. An indescribable chill instantly rushed from his feet to his brain. His scalp was numb, and his whole body instinctively burst out the lightning and sword intent that had been accumulated in his body for a long time. Dense bolts of lightning with sharp sword intent appeared in an instant. His somewhat plump figure immediately turned a deep blue. However, before the deep blue had time to spread, a soft wind cut through the air. In his sight, a slender but weak branch waved over casually. It was a branch that was casually broken off from a tree. The branch was very thin, soft, and long, and there were even a few leaves on the front end. The dew on the leaves had disappeared, but the leaves were still wet and looked extremely green. The branch, which seemed to be unable to withstand any force, casually waved into the lightning. In silence, all the sword intent suddenly dissipated, and the lightning that had not had time to spread disappeared in a trance. The slender and weak branch fell on his shoulder. When the branch waved over, it was very weak. When it fell on his shoulder, it was also very weak. But in his feeling, the branch was as heavy as a mountain, and it suddenly and directly destroyed all his defenses. Bang! Under the great pressure, his body uncontrollably knelt down on one knee. Crack! His thick and powerful arm suddenly snapped, and the bones in his shoulder were even more so shattered. The branch was still quietly placed on his shoulder. Because it touched something, the flexible branch bent. The wind blew over, and the green leaves on the branch swayed gently. He looked at the branch with a dull face, and even forgot the pain. He had no idea where the force that completely crushed him and directly destroyed his arm came from. The lightning completely dissipated. The sharp pain finally began to spread from his shoulder. His eyes darkened, and his face was pale. In his somewhat blurred vision, a figure was standing quietly in front of him, putting the branch on his shoulder, looking at the scratches and 6 small spots on the trunk in front of him. Black trousers, casual leather shoes, short hair, and a white shirt. He stood quietly, not arrogant, not strong, not fierce, but with a kind of indescribable evil, like a demon. He didn't get an answer, so he casually answered, took back the branch and asked again. What do these symbols represent? Li Tianlan. He tightly covered his broken arm and laughed bitterly. Looking at the enemy who appeared beside him out of nowhere, he only felt that everything around him seemed too unrealistic. Li Tianlan glanced at him, and seemed to feel that the fat man in front of him was a little familiar. He raised his eyebrows and said, "What's your name?" The fat man didn't say anything. Under the huge gap in strength, he didn't even feel humiliated, only astonishment and disbelief. In a trance, he still remembered the entrance maneuver in the spring 3 years ago. When he first saw Li Tianlan in the entrance maneuver, although he was kind, he still looked down on him. It had only been 3 years, but the other party even forgot his name. A master of the thundershocking realm. He suddenly felt that in the eyes of the other party, he was a nonentity of the thundershocking realm. I'm Fan Haoyu. The fat man said in a low voice. We've met before, the entrance maneuver, and the final battle of Heaven Capital. Fan Haoyu, a senior student of the Sky Academy. In this team collaborative combat maneuver, he was the elite leader of one of the 7 teams. Oh, Li Tianlan said, thought for a moment and said, you're Yuetong's friend. He shook the branch in his hand, thought again and added, you're the son of Minister Fan Tianyin? Fan Tianyin, one of the core figures of the Southeast faction, the minister of the Ministry of Security of Zhongzhou State. Yes. Fan Haoyu looked at Li Tianlan calmly. He used to be familiar with Li Tianlan. He was still familiar with him now. But the natural position was there. No matter how familiar they were still enemies. Your father saved your life, Li Tianlan said. I won't kill you, but Minister Fan owes me a favor. After the maneuver, I'll get it at the right time. His tone was flat without any ups and downs. The corner of Fan Haoyu's mouth moved, but he didn't know what to say. Li Tianlan's tone was too flat, as if he said that Fan Tianyin owed him a favor, and then he really owed him a favor. He didn't say what would happen if the Fan family didn't admit it. He went to ask for a favor. If he couldn't get it, he could pay with his life. Fan Haoyu experienced Li Tianlan's style for the first time. He was not arrogant and domineering, nor was he hysterical. He was calm and indifferent, but he had an irresistible strength. Your people are good at hiding. I came all the way here, and you're the 5th person I met. It's a little less. Li Tianlan raised the branch in his hand and scratched the thick trunk with the mark. The branch bent without any force, but the thick tree shook violently, and then suddenly cracked. The trunk tilted to both sides, and the almost completely invisible sword intent swept through the whole tree. The lush canopy. The straight tree trunk instantly turned into countless splinters. Before the debris fell to the ground, it had completely disappeared in the air. Fan Haoyu only felt a tingling in his scalp and asked subconsciously, where are the other 4 people? Li Tianlan walked past him and said lightly, they're not very lucky. None of them has a father like your father. Fan Haoyu sat on the ground in a daze. The moment the branch in Li Tianlan's hand broke his countless thunder sword intent, all his toughness and pride seemed to have completely disappeared. Looking at Li Tianlan's back walking into the teaching building, he didn't feel the so-called humiliation, but the most helpless powerlessness. Li Tianlan continued to move forward. When he was about to walk out of the woods, he saw a marked tree again. It was also a scratch. However, there were slightly more dots at the bottom. Li Tianlan didn't know what these marks represented, but now he was sure that these marks represented the way other teams contacted each other. This also meant that the teaching building and the warehouse in front were no longer in a state of no one, and even had traps. For Li Tianlan, it was enough to know this. Li Tianlan walked out of the edge of the woods in silence. There was an open space outside the edge of the woods. The warehouse and the teaching building stood there quietly in silence. The morning sun shone unscrupulously on the open space, bright and warm. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, glanced at the warehouse and the teaching building, and went straight forward. The branch was still in his hand. He raised his hand and casually pulled off a green leaf from the branch. Wang Shengxiao could clearly see Li Tianlan's movements. There was no distance in the world of binoculars. Looking down, Wang Shengxiao could even see every expression on Li Tianlan's face, and count every leaf on the branch in his hand. But there was no joy or excitement on his face. "He's coming." Wang Shengxiao held the binoculars and said in a flat tone. "So fast." Jiang Shangyu, who arrived almost at the same time as Wang Shengxiao, was meditating. Hearing Wang Shengxiao's words, he opened his eyes in astonishment. Mount Han hasn't arrived yet. Wang Shengxiao put down the binoculars in silence and said nothing. He knew that Li Tianlan would definitely choose to come here, but he didn't expect it to be so fast. If Li Tianlan had come 10 minutes later, they would have been more prepared. "I can hold him for a while." Behind Wang Shengxiao, a burly young man stood up and said calmly, "Ma Xue." Wang Shengxiao frowned and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "There's no other way." The young man said calmly, "I'll take my people to hold him. When all our people are here, the rest is up to you. Your role is not to be the vanguard," Wang Shengxiao said. "Neither are you and Jiang Shangyu," Chen Mashue said blandly. He was burly and strong, but his name was a little feminine. But in this session of the two academies, no one dared to look down on him. He was a young genius who was only slightly lower than Song Xiai and Jiang Shangyu in the hearts of the higher-ups. He was the leader of the Deep Sea Academy and the Blizzard. At the same time, he was also a young genius who approached Wang Shengxiao without hesitation after Wang Shengxiao joined the Shadow Organization. Even though he knew that Li Tianlan had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, he did not flinch at all. In this maneuver, his role was equally crucial. Except for them, no one knew what they had prepared in this maneuver to deal with Li Tianlan. The three young chosen ones were indeed a luxurious lineup. If they cooperated well and stood on top of each other, they would not be weaker than Li Tianlan. But not weaker than Li Tianlan was not their goal. What they wanted was to win. So in this maneuver, in addition to the three young chosen ones, Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai also prepared 2 sets of sword formations. The sword formation of Kunlun City was famous in the Dark World. But this time, one of the 2 sets of sword formations belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. Chen Mashua's role. He was the core figure in the sword formation of the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai had the Heaven Punishment Troop, which represented the most elite and terrifying conventional force of the Wang family of Beihai. In this maneuver, the sword formation of the Wang family of Beihai came from the Heaven Punishment Troop. This was also one of the trump cards of this maneuver. The Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. 1 Sword Punishment. Chapter 377. The land from the woods to the warehouse was flat and empty. There was only breeze and sunshine in the morning of Huiting. The sun fell on this empty flat land. Light and shadows coexisted, and it was eerily quiet. Li Tianlan stood at the edge of the woods and stared calmly at every corner nearby. This maneuver was simple to the point of boredom, but destined to be bloody. Because there were only enemies, it was impossible to waste too much time. Unless Li Tianlan wanted to hide in the dark and attack them one by one. Li Tianlan didn't want to waste time. He didn't want to waste time. And Wang Shengxiao, who had an absolute advantage in strength and number, obviously didn't want to waste time. This was the best place for the maneuver. Li Tianlan silently adjusted his breath. He held the soft branch in his hand. The branch was very long, and its tip hung on the ground. He took a step forward. The branch with its tip hanging on the ground rubbed against the ground. In an instant, there seemed to be the sound of thousands of long swords being unsheathed echoing between heaven and earth. The branch rubbed against the ground with the sound of metal rubbing. For a moment, in different corners of the warehouse, the teaching building, the flat land, the woods, there seemed to be different people drawing their swords. They drew their swords, but there was no sword energy. Only a sword intent that was so indiscernible that it could not be felt swept across the entire space. On the teaching building, Wang Shengxiao, who was holding a telescope, suddenly stiffened on the spot. The sword intent swept past him. In the blink of an eye, Wang Shengxiao's breath began to fall rapidly from the peak to the bottom, and then disappeared completely. His breathing was slowing down, and even his heartbeat became indistinct. Jiang Shangyu stood near Wang Shengxiao and also suppressed all his aura. The branch was still rubbing against the ground. The sword intent that filled every corner of heaven and earth kept spreading, gathering, and spreading. The completely uncatchable sword intent kept flowing between illusion and reality. Li Tianlan moved faster and faster. Crack! In front of Wang Shengxiao, the famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai, Firmament, which weighed hundreds of kilograms, shook. Wang Shengxiao's eyes focused, and he held the sword hilt tightly. The heavy sword suddenly became stable in the invisible sword intent all over the sky. The illusory but real sword intent spread through every floor of the teaching building. It seemed to find nothing and finally left the teaching building slowly. Wang Shengxiao's breath began to rise again. He held the sword hilt in his hand and looked at Jiang Shangyu. Both of their eyes were solemn. Invincible realm experts were never afraid of ambushes. Within the range of their domain, nothing could hide. The same was true for invincible realm experts who did not cultivate the domain and took another path. Wherever their sword wills passed, they could also see through any disguise. Li Tianlan had the combat capability of the invincible realm. In terms of the quality of sword intent, he was already in the invincible realm, so he naturally had some invincible realm means. However, his realm was still a little low, so his sword intent couldn't find Wang Shengxiao and Jiang Shangyu, who had hidden their breaths. But how could the others hide? Li Tianlan kept moving forward. He had already reached the flat ground between the forest and the warehouse. The sound of soft branches rubbing against the ground grew louder and louder. Wang Shengxiao's face darkened. He hesitated, picked up the walkie-talkie, and was about to say something. Li Tianlan suddenly lifted the branch that was rubbing against the ground. In an instant, the illusory sound of countless swords being unsheathed suddenly disappeared. However, the sound of a sword being unsheathed could be heard from every corner of the warehouse. Swords flew out uncontrollably from the surrounding dark corners. Behind each sword was an elite that was lying in ambush in the corner. Snap! Li Tianlan flicked the leaf he had picked from the branch into the sky. The leaf was swaying in the air. At this moment, Wang Shengxiao, who instinctively felt that something was wrong, subconsciously raised his binoculars and looked at the leaf that was flicked by Li Tianlan. The leaf was very small, green, and soft. There was no killing intent or sword intent floating in the air. Wang Shengxiao suddenly realized that he seemed to be retarded for a moment. He suddenly lowered the binoculars and tried to lock on Li Tianlan. But Li Tianlan had already disappeared. His speed of advance had not been fast, but the moment when countless swords flew into the sky, his body directly tightened. He strode wildly. Unimaginable power seeped into the ground from his feet. The whole warehouse and the teaching building seemed to be roaring and trembling. Li Tianlan moved like lightning and rushed directly to the corner closest to him. Everything happened in a flash. A hand reached out from the corner. He seemed to realize that his sword had flown into the sky and wanted to reach out to grab it. But the hand he grabbed was the other hand. Their hands were clasped together as if they were shaking hands, but the huge force unhesitatingly broke his arm, pulling up the elite member of the Blizzard team who had been hiding in the dark. Li Tianlan's expression was calm and indifferent. There was no fanaticism, no ferociousness, and no killing intent. He was just calm, indifferent, and superior. He clenched his fist. He waved his fist. Under the severe pain, all the fierceness of the elite of the Blizzard broke out completely. His long sword, which was brought into the sky by Li Tianlan's sword intent, had fallen. The elite of the blizzard suddenly roared, his whole body tightened, and the scorching temperature spread all over his body. The moment he fell into Li Tianlan's hands, he did not show the slightest timidity. He seemed to want to fully break out his strength of the fire-flaming realm, and fight desperately. The temperature was rising. His body glowed with light. But it was not fire. It was extremely red and mournful bloodlight. Li Tianlan punched him directly in the heart. Amidst the muffled sounds, every muscle on his enormous body seemed to burst into a bloody mist. The blood mist rose. Li Tianlan loosened his hand and kicked him away casually. This kick seemed to be very light because it was too casual. But the elite of the blizzard who was kicked away seemed to have a bomb hidden in his body. All the power burst out in his body. His body flew up in the air, and before it landed, it was directly shattered into pieces of flesh and blood. Everyone saw this scene through the big screen. The entire grandstand was in an uproar. Those who could come to watch the maneuver were not ordinary people. At least the death of a person would not make a fuss. But the elite students in the maneuver of the two academies were kicked into a pile of flesh and blood. Such a cruel method still shocked everyone. Everyone seemed to feel Li Tianlan's suppressed anger and resentment. But on the screen his eyes were still calm. The rain of blood fell behind him. Li Tianlan took a step and changed his direction. Like a phantom under the sun, he silently rushed across the distance of tens of meters, and appeared in another corner. In another corner, an elite of the shadow organization had gotten up and was ready to move, but there was a shadow above his head. He looked up in astonishment. From bottom to top, he did not see Li Tianlan's calm and indifferent face. In his sight, there was only a foot that was getting bigger and bigger. The lines on the sole of the leather shoes were constantly magnified in his eyes. Bang! Li Tianlan stepped his head into his chest with one foot. Blood spurted out from his body like a fountain, streaked across the sky, and left a string of blood sparkling with dreamy colors in the sun. The long sword that was guided to the sky by his sword intent finally began to fall. Li Tianlan moved. The open space in front of the warehouse moved, and the atmosphere suddenly changed. The scorching sun did not seem to rise, but the surrounding environment directly became extremely hot. A deep and steady voice abruptly resounded in every corner of the vicinity. Shadow blizzard. Formation. Li Tianlan paused for a while and slowly raised his head. The still bright but dazzling light shone down from the sky. Invisible heat waves continued to rise, and the sky became blurred. The heat twisted the air, and everything in sight became vague. On the flat ground, countless fallen leaves were set on fire in the blazing sword intent and rushed to the sky. The fire began to occupy all consciousness. Amidst the countless fluttering flames, a verdant green leaf was leisurely descending. It fell in the twisted air. It fell in the burning leaves. It was still falling. It kept falling. In the maneuver area where the heat waves were rising, the air was slightly twisted. A burly and handsome figure appeared above the warehouse. He stood in the air, holding the broad-bladed long sword in his hand tightly, and his breath was wild. The moment his figure appeared, the whole sky seemed to be on fire. The dazzling blue lightning lit up on his sword edge and danced wantonly. The fire and lightning intertwined wildly, rising in every corner and occupying all the space. There was fire everywhere. There was thunder everywhere. The sword intent whistled. Above the light, there was only a cold and arrogant voice resounding on the flat ground in front of the warehouse, and on the number 3 stand through the big screen. Chen Moshua, leader of Blizzard, send your highness to hell. Boom. Fire and lightning interweaved, occupying everyone's field of vision as they fell from the sky in a frenzy. Li Tianlan could not see Chen Moshua, who was going to send him to hell. Chen Moshua could not see Li Tianlan either. But the sword intent of the fire and lightning had already enveloped everything. So what if he could not see it? He raised his long sword high, and his voice shook the sky. Kill. Crack. Wang Tianzong sat in his seat without any expression. His eyes were still calm, but his palms were exerting force quietly, and he unconsciously crushed the armrest of his seat. Heaven punishment sword formation. It's heaven punishment sword formation. On the stand, next to Zhuang Huayang, the principal of the Sky Academy, a very senior old general, cried out involuntarily. Heaven punishment sword formation. One sword to kill the sky. No one thought that there was anything exaggerated about this statement. The Heaven Punishment Troop could be said to be the most elite conventional troop of the Wang family of Beihai. When the whole troop gathered, its deterrent power was even far greater than that of ordinary invincible realm experts. The number of people in the Heaven Punishment Troop was always controlled at 300. Every time one person died, another person would be added. There were always 300 people, no more and no less. But these were 300 people with the lowest strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. The Heaven Punishment Troop consisted of 5 people in a squad, 15 people in a squadron, and 150 people in a battalion. There were 20 squadrons in total. The Heaven Punishment Sword Formation was a sword formation on the scale of a squadron. Each squadron could form an independent Heaven Punishment Sword Formation, but independent sword formations could be connected with each other through special sword intent. When the whole Heaven Punishment Troop gathered together, 15 people in a formation, 20 sword formations were connected with each other, and the sword intent of 300 experts with the lowest strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm gathered into one sword. Why couldn't that sword strike kill the sky? This is indeed the starting move of the Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. The old general stared at the screen intertwined with fire and lightning and laughed at himself. The Wang family of Beihai really put in a lot of effort. Although the number of people in this group is small, their average strength is very good, almost as good as the formation of the real Heaven Punishment Troop. Is it useful? Zhuang Huayang sat quietly and looked calm. Those involved can't see clearly. It's a pity. The old general was stunned. He subconsciously glanced at Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyan not far away. The two most powerful men in Zhongzhou State looked tense and expressionless. On a small screen that was temporarily separated from the big screen, Gu Hanshan was rushing to the warehouse at full speed with dozens of elites. Indeed. The old general nodded. It's a pity. Fire and lightning intertwined like a waterfall. The messy sword intent kept gathering in the waterfall like light curtain, getting stronger and stronger. The light filled every corner. In the shadow. In the corner. One by one, the elites who ambushed around the warehouse in advance slowly appeared. Led by Chen Moxue, 15 elites with the lowest strength at the fire-flaming realm quietly surrounded Li Tianlan in the center. Your Highness, please go to hell. In the waterfall-like light curtain, Chen Moxue's voice shook the lightning and raging fire. Countless sword intent condensed into a sword. The sword light and the light curtain intertwined. With his voice, the violent light curtain tore the sky in an instant and roared down like a furious dragon. Your Highness, please go to hell. Your Highness, please go to hell? There was a ripple in Li Tianlan's eyes. The ripple gradually expanded and finally turned into a touch of arrogance. The arrogance turned into a wild laugh. The wild laughter penetrated the light curtain and sword intent, with an indescribable frivolity and violence. Send me to hell? Who deserves it? Li Tianlan laughed wildly and reached out his hand. He put his fingers together like a sword. Under the mighty light curtain, an extremely bright and dazzling light suddenly appeared. Who deserves it? Boom. The wild thunder was mighty, and the lightning, which had almost faded from blue to pure white, was constantly blooming in Li Tianlan's hands. 24 moves of sword. The first blade Wuji. The moment the Wuji sword intent appeared, the sword intent changed instantly. The first blade turned into the fifth blade. The fifth blade flying snow. It never snowed under the July sun in Huading. But a bone-chilling killing intent and brutality suddenly spread out with Li Tianlan as the center. The fifth blade turned again. The 16th blade, wild thunder. Amidst the bone-chilling coldness, the sound of thunder reverberated throughout the world. Li Tianlan's palms suddenly closed. He clenched his fists. A punch hit the sky. Boom. The first blade, the fifth blade, and the 16th blade. The sword intent of the three swords were connected. The completely blazing white lightning was released wildly with Li Tianlan as the center in an instant. The blazing white lightning tore the light curtain with sharp sword intent. A wave of air swept across the flat ground in front of the warehouse. The wave of air swept across the edge of the forest with the vast lightning. With a loud bang, countless trees turned into powder in an instant. The chaotic light was dissipating. The moment the light curtain of the heaven-punishing sword formation was broken, Chen Mashue's calm voice sounded, with a touch of determination and tragedy. Heaven punishment. After the light curtain collapsed, it was the sword. More than a dozen sword intents gathered into a giant sword phantom hundreds of meters long. Chen Mashue of the Blizzard team, with a sword, merged with the giant sword phantom in an instant. He and the sword became one. Between heaven and earth, there seemed to be a brilliant flowing light flashing under the bright sun. The flowing light was silent, but with overwhelming killing intent. It rushed directly to Li Tianlan. The flowing light was tall and broad. Its tail was still in the sky, but its front had already reached Li Tianlan. Chen Mashue's figure merged into the flowing light, and the sword intent was bursting. Li Tianlan, whose eyes were completely wild, still reached out his hand. He opened his 5 fingers. The sword intent flowed in his 5-finger sword, subtle but extremely fierce and violent. The 21st blade shatter of land. The subtle sword intent instantly rushed up to the sky. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his hand. In an instant, the flowing light and the sword intent rushing up to the sky shattered and exploded. Endless light swept across the sky and the earth. In the chaotic light and shadow, Li Tianlan's palm kept moving up. The sword intent of the flowing light pierced his arm, and his palm was covered with blood. Blood gushed from the corner of his mouth and dripped on his white shirt, like a blooming plum blossom. The shatter of land and river, and the heaven punishment. Chen Mashue's figure held the sword in the air and stabbed straight down. Li Tianlan's palm rose. At the moment when his sword intent broke out, Li Tianlan grabbed his neck fiercely. "Do you deserve it?" Li Tianlan grabbed Chen Mashue's neck and asked in a cold tone. Chen Mashue looked at Li Tianlan, who was bleeding from the corner of his mouth, in disbelief. At this moment he was not thinking about why he failed. He suddenly thought of a very ridiculous question. Li Tianlan broke the heaven-punishing sword formation with his bare hands at the cost of injury. But before that, he clearly saw the branch in Li Tianlan's hand. If that was his weapon, where did the branch go? Chapter 378. Chen Mashue had thought of many possibilities. Li Tianlan was very strong. He had the combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22. In this maneuver, no one was his opponent in a one-on-one fight. Chen Mashue knew very well that even if he had the heaven punishment sword formation, it would be difficult to send Li Tianlan to hell. After all, his strength was a little weak. The strength of the members of the sword formation was also a little weak. The real heaven punishment sword formation was centered by a real expert at the peak of the thundershocking realm, assisted by 2 experts of the thundershocking realm, and other experts of the fire-flaming realm. After the sword intent was condensed, the heaven punishment sword formation was almost no less than the full blow of the top expert of the half-step invincible realm. Now the strength of the heaven punishment sword formation formed by Chen Mashue was uneven. He himself was also a long way from the peak of the thundershocking realm. In such a sword formation, the sword move he exerted was at most infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm. Naturally, such a sword move could not kill Li Tianlan. But according to Chen Mashue's expectation, this sword move could at least seriously injure Li Tianlan. After all, according to the information they received, Li Tianlan had fought Gu Qianchuan and Gu Xingyin a few days ago. He was injured and was not in his peak state at all. Even if Li Tianlan broke their sword formation, he was bound to pay the price. Chen Mashue had thought of too many scenes after Li Tianlan was injured. At the moment, Li Tianlan was indeed injured. Blood flowed down the corner of Li Tianlan's mouth. The sword energy of the heaven punishment sword seemed to tear the skin on his arm. The red blood spread along the cuff and dyed Li Tianlan's entire palm red. Li Tianlan's essence, qi, and spirit did not decline at all. Instead, he became crazier and colder. He exerted a little force in his palm, grabbed Chen Mashue's neck, and lifted him up directly. Chen Mashue's face gradually turned purple, and he had difficulty breathing. He struggled subconsciously. In his sight, Li Tianlan's eyes were bloodshot, and the blood densely occupied the whites of his eyes. His eyes were scarlet. It was an indescribable violence and demonic. Wild, cold, fierce, irritable, without the so-called reason and thinking. At this moment, Li Tianlan was full of an indescribable strangeness and demonic nature. Chen Moshue spat out a mouthful of blood. He wanted to laugh, but he was extremely aggrieved. What had the heaven-punishing sword formation, which was regarded as one of the trump cards of the drill, done? It just left some superficial injuries on Li Tianlan. Oh, maybe he even broke a branch? This was the result of the battle? What made Chen Moshue most aggrieved was that the so-called heaven punishment sword formation was just a starting move. The sword formation had just been formed when it was broken. No words could describe the absurdity in Chen Moshue's heart. When the shadow of the giant sword pressed down on Li Tianlan like a flowing light, the sword intent of the shattering land was released in his hand. It was so subtle, yet so fierce and fast. The blood-stained palm tore apart the sword intent of the giant sword in an instant. When the heaven punishment sword was about to reach its peak, the palm directly grabbed his neck and pulled him down. Heaven punishing sword. The light curtain at the beginning was not, nor was the shadow of the giant sword. The real sky punishment sword was Chen Moshue's own sword as the core of the sword formation. The sword was interrupted by Li Tianlan at the most subtle moment when it was close to the peak. The slightest error could lead to a huge error. It was so exaggerated that it was like a coincidence. What was more exaggerated was that Chen Moshue did not feel Li Tianlan's sword intent or his power during the whole process. It seemed that the other party just stretched out his hand, and then everything was over. How did you? Li Tianlan's palm was getting tighter and tighter. Chen Moshue held Li Tianlan's palm tightly, and his voice was hoarse and distorted. Li Tianlan glanced at him. His eyes were cold and indifferent. Li Tianlan lifted Chen Moshue's hand and suddenly smashed Chen Moshue's body into the ground. Plop. It was not the dull sound of the body falling to the ground. Li Tianlan took the opportunity to smash Chen Moshue's body, as if it had been smashed directly into the water. A faint blue light appeared on the ground silently. The light continued to refract, spread, and converged with each other. That was the most violent lightning. But at this moment, the lightning was like water gathering, hard and soft. Countless rays of light intertwined into the water surface, which dissolved most of the power that Li Tianlan had exerted on Chen Moshue. Blood kept gushing from the corners of Chen Moshue's mouth. The heaven punishment sword was interrupted by Li Tianlan at the most subtle moment. The sword intent did not pour out, but directly exploded in his body. Li Tianlan's power, which had been dissolved by more than half, rushed into his body and directly destroyed the balance in his body. Chen Moshue's face was pale, and his aura declined in an instant. The heaven punishment sword did not seriously injure Li Tianlan. Instead, it directly made Chen Moshue lose his combat capability. The water waves gathered by the lightning were still surging, wrapping Chen Moshue and spreading up along his legs. Li Tianlan loosened his hand and turned around abruptly. At the end of the water and lightning, Wang Shengxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, slowly walked over. The heavenly son of Beihai, who had always been modest and gentle, had no smile on his face at this time. His face was expressionless, and his eyes were cold. He held the broad and heavy sword tightly in his hand, and his whole body was surging with sword energy. Li Tianlan's scarlet eyes immediately locked on the vital parts of Wang Shengxiao's body. Let him go. Wang Shengxiao gently raised the giant sword in his hand, looked at Li Tianlan, and said in a calm tone. Boundless sword intent whizzed around him and gathered toward the ether sword in his hand. He looked straight into Li Tianlan's eyes, with an irresistible toughness and majesty. Li Tianlan's scarlet eyes grew crazier. He put his palm on the top of Chen Moshue's head. The water-like lightning continued to spread along Chen Moshue's body. Li Tianlan's palm also lit up with a touch of blue, and then it turned into blazing white. The blue water waves and the blazing white sword intent, one above the other, were in a stalemate with Chen Moshue's body as the battlefield. Chen Moshue's face suddenly twisted, as if he was suffering great pain. Let him go. Wang Shengxiao's eyes grew colder, and the surging sword intent around him had a touch of killing intent and mania. He had to keep Chen Moshue alive. Chen Moshue was different from ordinary elites. In fact, although his talent was not as good as that of the real young chosen one, it was not much worse. In the vast Deep-Sea Academy, except for Jiang Shangyu's 3,000 World and Song Seas Phantom, the Blizzard was the most powerful organization. Chen Moshue took the initiative to approach him, and the Wang family of Beihai had no reason to let go of such a talent. This was the era of the Chosen One. But under the brilliance of the Chosen One, other people might shine. In the era of Wang Tianzong, Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun, there would also be figures like Dongqing Wudi, Situt Songyue, Gu Qianchuan, and the Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu. With Chen Moshue's talent, 10 years later, he could definitely grow into a top superior of the half-step invincible realm. Such a person would definitely be the most important in the team Wang Shengxiao would set up in the future. You. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Shengxiao and sneered. His voice was a little weird, a little stiff and hollow, but it sounded from all directions, grand and indifferent. Wang Shengxiao glanced at Chen Moshue. The two looked at each other for a moment. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his palm. The blazing white lightning gathered in his palm. 21st Blade Shatter of Land. Kill. The moment the sword intent broke out in Li Tianlan's palm, Wang Shengxiao suddenly raised the giant sword in his hand. Chen Moshue's face was completely distorted, and he suddenly roared. The lightning and water waves that wrapped his body faded. Chen Moshue's whole body was spurting blood. The blood shone with a mournful red luster, with wisps of sword intent. That was the sky-punishing sword intent that exploded in Chen Moshue's body. In an instant, the sword intent in the blood and the water like lightning blended with each other. In every corner, the elites of Blizzard and Phantom drew their swords at the same time. Wang Shengxiao's figure appeared in the sky, and the dark giant sword pointed at Li Tianlan with a cold light. In an instant, it seemed that all the sword intent madly gathered toward Wang Shengxiao's body. Sky punishing. Wang Shengxiao's loud and majestic voice rang out like thunder. The surging sword intent rose from the bottom to the top, and the whole world turned into a dazzling blue in the blink of an eye. The roaring thunder rolled down from the sky. The sun retreated under the blue sword intent, and it rained heavily in the sky. The blue sword rain. Li Tianlan broke Chen Moshue's sky-punishing sword formation. But Chen Moshue was still there, and so was the incomplete sword formation. Wang Shengxiao's appearance directly replaced Chen Moshue as the new core of the sky-punishing sword formation, and Chen Moshue, who was seriously injured, became a support with the remaining sky-punishing sword intent. This sword strike was abrupt and violent. The sword rain fell and gathered. Wang Shengxiao's figure was getting higher and higher, and this sword was out of everyone's sight. His figure disappeared in an instant. The torrential rain directly gathered together with the messy sword intent. The sword rain merged, and everyone's sword intent completely gathered together, turning into a beam of blue light that was so bright that it could run through the sky and the earth. One end of the beam was the sky, and the other end was Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan suddenly put his hands together. The sword intent of the shattering of land kept blooming between his hands, and the blazing white light intertwined in front of him, turning into a light curtain. The torrential rain turned into a beam of light, and the beam of light shone straight down and fell on the light curtain. The whole light curtain suddenly shook, and a lot of blood spilled behind the light curtain. Li Tianlan's blood. Boom! Countless sword intents surged together and exploded directly. The blazing white light curtain was shattered in an instant, and the beam of light formed by the sword rain completely disappeared. In the messy light and shadow, Li Tianlan's clothes were completely torn, and his whole body was covered with blood. His face was pale, and a wound on his forehead kept spurting blood. The blood covered his face, making him look extremely ferocious. Ah! Li Tianlan's eyes were scarlet, and he suddenly roared. He suddenly tore off his torn shirt and roared with all his strength. Blood flowed down from his body. At this moment, Li Tianlan was like a wounded beast, with no sense left, only madness. The sword intent of the shattering of land flowed in his hands and changed instantly. The 14th Blade Slaughter. The crazy killing intent spread all over the sky with the awe-inspiring flashing sword light. The shattering of land was the sword of shattering. The 14th blade was the heart of slaughter. The two sword intents merged with each other and superimposed to form a new sword. The 17th blade, Azura. All the blood dripping down from Li Tianlan's body floated in the air at the same time. The blood gathered into a scarlet sword in front of him. Li Tianlan, who was like a bloody man, suddenly reached out and held the blood sword in his hand. In an instant, the endless blood-colored sword light suddenly burst out. The sword light rose above the ground, like a bloody tide surging with killing intent. Wang Xingxiao's figure appeared in the sky. He held the hilt of firmament tightly with both hands, and fell straight down from the top. His figure was so far away, so clear. There was no sword light, no faint blue. There was only one person and one sword. Falling. Sprinting. His speed was getting faster and faster. The dark firmament rubbed against the air, igniting flames, and then the flames were extinguished under the high speed. A sword intent so grand that it almost didn't exist directly covered with Wang Xingxiao's figure. A faint blue burned on the blade of firmament. Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle. The flickering blue dot was very small, but it was as grand as the whole sky. It wasn't that there was no sword intent between heaven and earth. All the sword intent turned into heaven and earth with this heaven punishment sword. The bloody tide rose against the sky. Li Tianlan was as ferocious as a devil, and as crazy as Azura. The heaven punishment sword intent that covered heaven and earth fell directly into the bloody tide. Wang Xingxiao's figure was surrounded by the blood-colored sword light, but for the first time, it was so clear and so majestic. The faint blue dot on firmament became brighter and brighter in the bloody sword light. The half-style samsara he wanted to cultivate failed, and he was seriously injured. Under such circumstances, with the help of the heaven punishment sword formation, this could almost be said to be Wang Xingxiao's strongest sword. The sword intent continued to stack and condense, and this sword steadily entered the half-step invincible realm. It was not an ordinary half-step invincible realm. This was equivalent to Wang Xingxiao's full strength after he entered the half-step invincible realm. It was like heaven and earth were squeezing at the same time. The blood-colored sword light stagnated. The faint blue dot on the blade of firmament expanded instantly. This sword was like heaven and earth, like eternity. The huge blade collided with the bloody sword condensed by blood. The picture seemed to freeze for a moment. The faint blue was no longer flashing. The bloody light was no longer restless. Without a sound, all the sword intent and sword chi shattered one after another. A fierce storm suddenly rose on the flat ground in front of the warehouse. The storm surged and exploded in absolute silence, and the aftermath swept through every corner of the battlefield. Chen Mashua, who was seriously injured and was about to leave the battlefield, and more than a dozen elites of Shadow and the Blizzard were all swallowed by the storm in an instant. The chaotic bloody light rose in the storm, and the broken limbs and corpses were completely broken in the storm. The storm continued to sweep across the flat ground and rushed into the dense forest. Countless trees were uprooted and broken in the air under the storm. The sword intent was still raging. Boom. After the silent destruction, there was finally a deafening bang. Wang Shengxiao and Li Tianlan spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. With Li Tianlan as the center, the hard and flat ground suddenly collapsed and became a deep pit. Water stains appeared in the deep pit. The water stains turned into streams and quickly filled the whole pit. The flat ground turned into a pool of water. Li Tianlan's figure was directly blasted out nearly 200 meters in the broken sword intent. He smashed through the thick wall of the warehouse and disappeared from everyone's sight. Wang Shengxiao's figure rushed into the dense forest uncontrollably. A pair of palms suddenly appeared from behind and grabbed Wang Shengxiao. Under the huge impact, the two of them retreated nearly 20 meters before they stopped. Wang Shengxiao spat out a mouthful of blood again. His face was pale, but his eyes were unprecedentedly cold. What's going on? A voice sounded behind Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao looked up at the person. The person who caught him was Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City. The three young heavenly sons had completely gathered. Wang Shengxiao gritted his teeth and stood up, saying with a smile, Li Tianlan lost. He could be sure of his injury, and he could also be sure of Li Tianlan's injury. One was Li Tianlan without the abnormal protection of the cloud silk robe, and the other was not in the peak state. Facing his peak sword strike, it could be said that both of them were injured. Li Tianlan could still fight. So could Wang Shengxiao. But at this moment, Wang Shengxiao had Gu Hanshan, Jiang Shangyu, and dozens of elite soldiers from the two academies by his side. No matter how strong Li Tianlan was, how could he win when he was seriously injured? Chapter 379. Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan looked in the direction of the warehouse at the same time. The warehouse was very large. The sunlight cast a large shadow around the warehouse. In their sight, there was a huge hole with a diameter of nearly 10 meters in the thick wall. There were dense cracks around the hole, which was the trace of Li Tianlan's body crashing into the warehouse. Wang Shengxiao moved his body. When he was about to speak, he spat out another mouthful of blood. His body trembled slightly, as if he was suffering great pain. He injured Li Tianlan with the Heaven Punishment Sword, but Li Tianlan's sword intent in his body also detonated the injury of trying to practice the half-reincarnation for several days in meditation. Wang Shengxiao's aura suddenly became weak. Wang Shengxiao felt a little regretful. He felt that he had really overestimated Li Tianlan, or underestimated Gu Qianchuan. Even the last invincible realm expert on the holy list was still an invincible realm expert. It should be no problem for him to suppress Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan destroyed one of Gu Qianchuan's arms. How good could he be? Wang Shengxiao decided to practice the half-reincarnation in the last few days of the maneuver, because Li Tianlan's extreme strength disturbed his mind, and made him instinctively ignore the price Li Tianlan had to pay to do all that. Now it seemed that the price Li Tianlan paid for destroying one of Gu Qianchuan's arms was more serious than everyone thought. The treasured cloud silk robe was damaged. Li Tianlan himself was also seriously injured. At this moment, Wang Shengxiao suddenly questioned himself. If he hadn't practiced the half-reincarnation a few days ago, he wouldn't have participated in the maneuver with serious injuries. In this way, the Heaven Punishment Sword just now would have been more powerful. Would a stronger sword directly take Li Tianlan's life, and decide the result of the maneuver without Jiang Shangyu and Gu Hanshan's intervention? Wang Shengxiao raised his arm, and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He was injured and couldn't exert all his strength. He was seriously injured by my sword just now. Now he is no longer a threat. Wang Shengxiao said calmly. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City united, and turned the triennial event in Zhongzhou State into an undisguised murder. At this point, no one had a reason to retreat. The firmament in Wang Shengxiao's hand suddenly shook. He looked at the broken hole in the warehouse wall and said in a calm but firm tone, "So let's end this quickly." The firmament was dragged on the ground. Wang Shengxiao held the hilt and rushed forward. The heavy sword's edge rubbed against the ground violently, causing sparks to fly. The sparks then turned into flames. It turned into raging fire, and finally into lightning. Wang Shengxiao's speed was getting faster and faster. He was sprinting with all his strength. The firmament sword rushed out of the forest, into the flat ground, and rushed to the warehouse. Wherever the huge blade passed, it left a huge ravine that was hundreds of meters long. The lightning was like water, wrapping Wang Shengxiao up. The waves surged up and down. Extreme softness. Unyielding. Gu Hanshan followed closely beside Wang Shengxiao. Compared with Wang Shengxiao, whose sword was only violent and fierce, his momentum was grander and more gorgeous. One sword wheel after another spun crazily around him. Hundreds of sword shadows whizzed up and down around him. Dark blue lightning spread around Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan rushed forward, but his feet did not move. His whole body seemed to be stepping on a huge sword shadow. As he rode on the sword, countless sword shadows bloomed around him like a blooming flower. The flower kept blooming, and the lightning kept expanding, but Gu Hanshan was surrounded by darkness. It was the 9th secluded impasse in the 8th Supreme Sword Dance. Wang Shengxiao said to end this quickly. Gu Hanshan had no objection at all. He used his strongest sword at the beginning. The focus of the cooperation between the 3000 World and the Phantom Palace was Li Tianlan. Now, if the young forces owned by several of them combined, except for the credits deducted from the combination of forces, it was almost the same as the credits of the East Emperor Palace. Once Li Tianlan died, several young forces would merge and completely block all the paths of the East Emperor Palace, which could be regarded as cutting off the last hope of the Li family. But it was also crucial whether the merged forces were led by Kunlun City or the Wang family of Beihai. The ownership of dominance also depended on the result of this maneuver. Once Li Tianlan died, the competition between the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City would come next. In this way, it would be more like the final team maneuver. Gu Hanshan was clear about this, but at this time he spared no effort and did not intend to take advantage of Wang Shengxiao at all. This time, the two sides joined hands to deal with Li Tianlan, which meant that they had bet on the future reputation of Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan. On such an occasion, competition was competition. There was no calculation or conspiracy. The two rushed all the way forward. In the woods, a large number of elites brought by Gu Hanshan had begun to form a formation. The sword formation of Kunlun City was not as extremely overbearing as the Heaven Punishment sword formation, but it was more complicated and delicate. This sword formation did not need an absolutely strong core, but a balance in all aspects. Therefore, there were more people in this sword formation, and its momentum was more terrifying. This formation might not be able to punish the sky, but it was enough to kill. The final hit formation. Boom! Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan were extremely fast. However, there was someone faster than the two of them, and the distance between them was also shorter. When the two had just rushed half the distance, a roar suddenly sounded on the side of the teaching building near the warehouse. A huge force surged in the teaching building and directly collapsed one side of the building. The dazzling and dangerous lightning surged in the collapsed building. Jiang Shangyu's figure rushed out of the teaching building and directly smashed into the warehouse. His figure stretched to the extreme in the sky, and tens of thousands of thunderbolts burst out with him as the center. Jiang Shangyu's expression was dignified and solemn. He had no sword in his hand. Looking at the warehouse that was getting closer and closer, he directly raised his fist. This was a unique skill that belonged to his family. Thousands of miles of rivers and mountains. The lightning was mighty, and Jiang Shangyu's figure fell at the same time. Jiang Shangyu did not hold back at all. He and Li Tianlan had cooperation. But the premise of all cooperation was that Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu could survive this maneuver. In the whole Zhongzhou state and the world, countless people's eyes were focused on this maneuver area at this time, including the eyes of at least several invincible realm experts. Among them were Zhongzhou State's Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong and Zhongzhou State's God of War Gu Xingyun. Jiang Shangyu punched at the closest distance. How could he hold back? How could he dare to hold back? The frenzied and violent thunderbolts rushed out of the teaching building and smashed the roof of the warehouse immediately. Jiang Shangyu's figure rushed into the warehouse. In an instant, all the thunderbolts around him completely burst out in the most ferocious way. The light with the meaning of destruction turned into a shock wave, sweeping the entire warehouse. The warehouse was full of chaotic and dangerous light. Jiang Shangyu punched out, and the second punch condensed again. The martial arts of the Jiang family only had a pair of iron fists, without sword intent. But in the countless thunderbolts scattered by his punch, he clearly noticed that there was a weak sword energy behind him. Jiang Shangyu's eyes hesitated. Then he suddenly turned around and punched with all his strength again. Picturesque landscape. The violent fist wind raised crazy thunderbolts, and Jiang Shangyu's whole body was full of light. He saw Li Tianlan. But in the twinkling of an eye, Jiang Shangyu's hair stood on end. The picturesque landscape had already been blasted out uncontrollably, with Jiang Shangyu's voice somewhat distorted because of extreme shock. You, bang. Similarly, a fist directly hit Jiang Shangyu's fist. Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan approached the warehouse almost at the same time. A hoarse and fearful roar suddenly came from the warehouse. The whole warehouse kept shaking and swaying under the extreme force. Countless cracks continued to spread on the warehouse's walls. As soon as Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan stepped into the warehouse, the power in the warehouse suddenly broke out. Boom! There seemed to be a wild thunder in the whole warehouse. The tall and heavy warehouse completely collapsed in an instant in everyone's sight. Huge stones and messy steel bars flew in all directions, and the whole warehouse directly disappeared from everyone's sight. Endless lightning surged out from the collapsed warehouse, bringing with it a blazing white flame that burned everything. Jiang Shangyu's figure was blasted into the teaching building at a speed faster than when he fell. Li Tianlan, whose eyes were red and covered in blood, was almost evil at this time. In the eyes of Gu Hanshan and Wang Shengxiao, it seemed to be madness at the end of the road, but it was also extremely dangerous and silent. Li Tianlan's figure rushed into the teaching building after Jiang Shangyu. In the sky full of thunderbolts and flames, his body was like a scarlet shadow. Save him! Gu Hanshan and Wang Shengxiao said at the same time. For both the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, the Jiang family in Beijiang was valuable enough to rope in. If they could get Jiang Shangyu's loyalty, even if they entered the peak of the divine list in the future, Jiang Shangyu would be their best right-hand man. Such a person was much more valuable than Chen Moshue. How could they not save him? Their figures flashed at the same time, broke through the diffusing flames and thunderbolts, and rushed into the teaching building. Li Tianlan was completely crazy. The thunderbolts and flames seemed to be completely integrated in his hands. He was covered in blood, but his whole body was full of blazing white light. The whole teaching building was shaking. In the space on the third floor, Li Tianlan madly chased after Jiang Shangyu, who was fleeing desperately. There was no word to describe the kind of madness and wildness that made people's scalps numb. Walls, tables and chairs, glass, blackboard, stairs. Everything was completely broken in Li Tianlan's attack. Nothing could stand between him and Jiang Shangyu for even a second. Jiang Shangyu desperately parried, sweeping his legs, elbows, knees and hooks. The flowing blazing white light burst out with Li Tianlan's every move, and the whole teaching building kept shaking in his attack. In this state, Li Tianlan simply ignored everything. Jiang Shangyu was already covered in blood, but he was pulled over and thrown out by Li Tianlan again and again. This was no longer a battle. It was a brutal killing. A naked brutal killing. The firmament sword was raised in an instant. Sweeping. The thunderbolts, which were like water light, suddenly became extremely fierce and violent. The light was everywhere, and there was no fluctuation. A large light curtain swept toward Li Tianlan in an instant. The sword wheel around Gu Hanshan was fully released, and countless sword shadows extended to the limit. The pseudo-domain of the ninth secluded impasse directly shrouded Li Tianlan with Wang Shengxiao's thunderbolts. Li Tianlan seemed to have completely lost his mind. He suddenly turned around and directly gave up on Jiang Shangyu. With red eyes, he directly pounced on Gu Hanshan. In an instant, Li Tianlan was completely shrouded in the ninth secluded impasse. But ninth secluded impasse was not dark. Instead, there was white light everywhere. 21st blade shatter of land. Shatter of land. Shatter of land. The completely violent sword energy rushed through the light curtain brought by the firmament sword, and shattered the pseudo-domain of the ninth secluded impasse. Covered in blood, Li Tianlan almost instantly arrived in front of Gu Hanshan, who was the only one who was still in his peak state. Countless bloodstains flowed on his body. Li Tianlan suddenly grabbed Gu Hanshan's shoulders with both hands and pressed down. Boom! The ground on the third floor of the teaching building suddenly collapsed. Li Tianlan directly pressed Gu Hanshan into a classroom on the second floor. Gu Hanshan's face was livid, and the sword shadows kept flashing all over him. 7 unique flowing lights. Like a stream of flowing light, he directly rushed out of the classroom along the nearest distance. Bang! With a dull sound, Li Tianlan directly smashed the wall. Once again, he grabbed Gu Hanshan's neck. With a messy sound, the young master of Kunlun City was smashed into another classroom in an extremely embarrassing manner. Countless attacks fell on Gu Hanshan like crazy. Just like when he chased after Jiang Shangyu. The classrooms were completely smashed one after another. Attack, attack, attack. White light lingered in every inch of space and kept bursting around Li Tianlan. Gu Hanshan, who was completely covered in dust, twisted his face and suddenly shouted angrily, "Get lost!" 5 elements annihilation. 5 sword intents that he had accumulated for a long time, surrounded Li Tianlan, and fell fiercely. Go to hell. With a ferocious face, Gu Hanshan broke out with all his strength. The 8th supreme sword move suddenly rotated and chopped around Li Tianlan. The ninth secluded impasse covered everything, and the three elements' annihilation took shape in the darkness. A dense sword shadow rushed directly into the ninth secluded impasse along with the sword shadow. At the same time as the sword shadow rushed into the pseudo-domain, there was also a majestic thunderbolt. Jiang Shangyu and Wang Shengxiao appeared here at the same time. The moment Li Tianlan was shrouded in the pseudo-domain, they attacked mercilessly. Gu Hanshan's face was gloomy and cold. A dagger slowly slid down his cuff. The thunderbolt spread quickly on the blade of the broken sword. Pseudo-domain sword shadow thunderbolt. Everything kept exploding around Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan trembled violently all over. Gu Hanshan sneered, raised his hand, and directly threw out the dagger in his hand. The thunderbolt of the dagger bloomed in the pseudo-domain. The ninth secluded impasse suddenly exploded. More blood sprinkled down in a mess of light and shadow. The crumbling teaching building was completely quiet. When the light dissipated, when the dust settled, everyone saw the final result of this sword strike. Li Tianlan, who was known as the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State, twitched all over. Under the siege of three people, Gu Hanshan's last sword pierced through his abdomen. The dagger drove his body and nailed him to the wall. There was an uproar in the number 3 stand. No one was surprised. Almost all of them only had doubts on their faces. There was some commotion in the 40,000 troops. But Dongcheng Wudi was still expressionless. An old patriarch of a wealthy and powerful family in the southeast slowly walked to the front of the stand and sat down. He said with a smile, "Little Han, I heard that you invested a lot of money in the East Emperor Palace?" "Yes, a lot." Han Donglu, the founder of the Flourishing Age Fund, sat in the same row as Wang Tianzong and others and smiled gently. The old patriarch sneered, looking at the financial tycoon who almost suffocated him in his own base camp, and said sarcastically, "You also have a time when your investment fails? That's rare. I have investments in the 3000 world and phantom world. I will earn them back." Han Donglu was calm and collected. "But you supported Li Tianlan. That means you offended His Majesty Sword Emperor and Gu Xingyun." The old patriarch patted Han Donglu on the shoulder and said meaningfully, "When Li Tianlan dies, you won't get anything from the layout of the special warfare system for the next few decades. The money you invested in the East Emperor Palace will be wasted." "What if Li Tianlan doesn't die?" Han Donglu asked indifferently. The old patriarch subconsciously glanced at Li Tianlan, who was nailed to the wall, and said disdainfully, "Is it possible? If Tianzong and Xingyun are as narrow-minded as you, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City don't need to develop. My investment in the East Emperor Palace is a normal investment. If I fail, I will lose a little. If he really wins, it will be a big profit." Han Donglu's tone was indifferent. "Win?" The old patriarch sneered. "How can that boy win?" Han Donglu looked at Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun, who were a few seats away. In his sight, Gu Xingyun's face became more and more gloomy. But the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State had closed his eyes. Han Donglu glanced at the old patriarch, and gently raised the corner of his mouth. "Ah. Those who think Tianlan is a little weak, don't worry." Chapter 380. No one could have imagined such a scene. Before the maneuver began, no one, including Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu, expected that Li Tianlan, who was already the strongest of the young generation in Zhongzhou State, would be nailed to the wall by a sword. They never underestimated their strength, especially Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan. One had wind and thunder veins, and the other had heavenly king heart. They had the best physical quality, the most perfect training breakthrough, and the most powerful inheritance. All of these could make them break out the combat capability far beyond the same realm. Both of them were at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but they were already qualified to look down on a considerable number of superiors of the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu's reputation was not as good as the first two, but in everyone's mind, he was not a weakling either. He had been in the half-step thunder-shocking realm for 3 years and broke through to the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm, which was enough to show that his potential was equally strong. If the three of them joined forces, they could even fight against Li Tianlan, who had the combat capability of the invincible realm. Furthermore, they had also prepared 2 sword formations that were equally powerful. All of this was well prepared, which showed the absolute importance they attached to Li Tianlan. In this maneuver, both Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao were ready to pay a great price, and they were even ready to stagnate in their martial arts realm for a few years. Li Tianlan was extremely powerful. They weren't weak either. Comparing the strength of both sides, they had at least a 50 to 60% chance of winning. This was enough for them to make up their minds to participate in this exercise. But they didn't expect everything to go so smoothly. Without the protection of the cloud silk robe, Li Tianlan was not at his peak. In this state, Li Tianlan still caused them a lot of losses and troubles in all the victories. But compared with their expectations, such losses and troubles were much smaller. Wang Shengxiao was seriously injured. Both Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu had internal injuries of varying degrees. But Li Tianlan was nailed to the wall by Gu Hanshan's sword. All the tables and chairs in the classroom had been completely smashed, and the walls had collapsed, bringing up a large amount of dust. Dust fell and rose again. Countless ashes fell on Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood. The short sword thrown by Gu Hanshan was still shaking. Li Tianlan's body seemed to be suffering great pain, twitching slightly with the vibration of the dagger. Dust and blood covered his body. Li Tianlan was very dirty and looked extremely embarrassed. This was the Li family's last hope. They were the enemies most likely to threaten the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City in the next few decades. He was the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State. But now, the prodigy was nailed to the wall, covered in dirt and dust. He looked so pitiful, so petty, so weak. Wang Xingxiao remained calm. Jiang Shangyu remained calm. Gu Hanshan's expression was calm, but there was a kind of undisguised cruelty and coldness in his eyes. The combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22. This was the biggest shadow that shrouded their hearts, and it almost made them despair. But now, the shadow that made them feel the most despair was pinned in front of them, heavily injured and on the verge of death. The shadow in his heart was gradually fading. The 3 of them seemed to have become purer and purer. Vaguely, Wang Shengxiao saw his way to the half-step invincible realm. Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu also gained something. Thank you. Wang Shengxiao broke the silence. He looked at Li Tianlan and said in a simple and calm tone. He looked at Li Tianlan. This was the young man of the same generation that he admired, and even respected the most. They won the exercise. But Wang Xingxiao didn't feel happy. He felt a little regretful. But he would not regret it. Li Tianlan might not have died here. But Wang Xingxiao knew that he had no choice. His hands and shoulders shouldered not only the firmament, but also the Wang family of Beihai. In the months to come, he would have to experience too many involuntary and unwilling situations. But he would no longer have a choice. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually dimmed. Wang Xingxiao looked at him silently. He wanted to say a lot, but he didn't want to say anything. At this moment, it seemed that whatever he said would be a mockery. But there was only respect in Wang Xingxiao's heart. He looked at him quietly, and his eyes were a little bleak. It's all thanks to you that I can gain something today. Gu Hanshan looked at Li Tianlan. The cruelty and coldness in his eyes gradually turned into a somewhat twisted smile. Go in peace. He said, Zhongzhou State will have me and the Gu family in the future. We don't need the glory of the Li family. The corners of his mouth couldn't help curling up, and his killing intent was awe-inspiring. It seemed that everyone had forgotten. The young man who was nailed to the wall by him was the 9th on the world divine list. This ranking might be exaggerated, but Li Tianlan's name had always been on the divine list. Today he nailed an expert on the divine list to the wall. Gu Hanshan's eyes were a little ferocious. He glanced at Wang Xingxiao and then at Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu shrugged and didn't speak. I'll do it. Gu Hanshan's eyes fell on Wang Shengxiao again. His meaning was clear. He wanted to send Li Tianlan to hell in person. Whatever. Wang Shengxiao was a little dispirited. Gu Hanshan walked over slowly. Li Tianlan's eyes grew dimmer. The scarlet in his eyes gradually faded, and his black eyeballs gradually expanded. After the scarlet color disappeared, Li Tianlan's eyes instantly became dark, and no white could be seen. In Gu Hanshan's perception, Li Tianlan's vitality was rapidly fading. But a sword intent suddenly rose in the classroom. He suddenly reached out and held the dagger nailed to him. His eyes were still dim. His life was still passing. His aura was still weakening. All the glory and hope of the Li family seemed to have completely gone to the bottom after a short period of madness. Li Tianlan directly pulled out the dagger. Blood gushed out. His body fell to the ground. The moment his aura was extremely weak, the sword intent that suddenly rose in the classroom suddenly became extremely violent. Watch out! Jiang Shangyu and Wang Shengxiao's faces changed dramatically, and they roared in unison. Without any hesitation, the two of them directly took action. Li Tianlan held the dagger and stood up straight. His eyes were pitch black, with an indescribable silence and darkness. All his vitality seemed to be transformed into the most violent sword intent by him in the blink of an eye. The blazing white flame and the wild thunder surged without warning with Li Tianlan as the center. The sword intent swept through the air. The whole space twisted violently. A storm suddenly rose in the whole teaching building, overturning the mess in the classroom and lifting the ceiling. The blazing white fire raged wildly in the wind in an instant, but the lightning suddenly condensed in one place. Li Tianlan raised the dagger. The blazing white lightning kept jumping around the dagger, and then instantly turned into the most dazzling blue. Everything happened too fast. Li Tianlan just raised the dagger. The sword energy seemed to reach its peak directly without any short accumulation. The shining blue lightning was completely filled by the sword energy, and it continued to expand in the blazing white fire. The sword energy was mighty. It was not sharp, not sinister. There was only an irresistible strength and majesty. The Wang family of Beihai, sword of Emperor Path. The fire was like a raging wave. The lightning entwined with the sword energy followed the fire closely, and almost instantly rushed to Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan's reaction was not slow at all. Li Tianlan had begun to retreat as soon as he raised the dagger in his hand. A large expanse of sword light wandered around him, and sword wheels rose up and surrounded Gu Hanshan. This was pure defense and retreat. The condensed sword of Emperor Path suddenly exploded in the thunder and fire. Gu Hanshan, who retreated in a hurry, and Wang Shengxiao and Jiang Shangyu, who acted in a hurry, were directly shrouded by the sword intent. The storm that arose out of nowhere raged fiercely. The sword light of Sword of Emperor Path shone more brightly, and the sword light was surging, crazily suppressing Wang Shengxiao and the other two who were in a passive position. Boom! The teaching building shook completely, and dense cracks almost covered the entire staircase. The sword intent of Sword of Emperor Path broke out, directly smashing Wang Shengxiao and the other two from the second floor to the first floor. Li Tianlan's pitch-black pupils were completely on fire. His eyes were dim, but the crazy scarlet once again covered his eyes. His pupils had completely turned into a daunting dark red. The sword energy had not yet dissipated. At the same second when Wang Shengxiao and the other two fell, Li Tianlan rushed down without hesitation. In front of stand number 3, on the huge screen, the picture suddenly froze for a moment. Li Tianlan and the other two completely disappeared from the picture. Only the cracked wall appeared on the screen. The wall was snow-white. Only a sword mark was carved there. When a considerable number of people were a little confused, Song Xiai, who did not appear in the stand but stood in another corner, and looked at the big screen, suddenly looked extremely gloomy. She held the long sword in her hand tightly. After hesitating for a moment, the woman who had already given up rushed to the maneuver area without hesitation. The picture on the big screen froze for 5 seconds. Then it became light that filled the whole screen. Chaos. The whole screen seemed to be shaking in the loud roar. The blazing fire, the violent thunder, the bone-chilling ice, the messy storm, and the pervading smoke and dust merged into an extremely chaotic light and shadow. Light and shadow covered everyone's sight. Indistinctly, a few blurry shadows entangled with each other in the extremely chaotic light. Crazy. Everyone was fighting crazily. Wherever the 4 figures passed by, there was destruction everywhere. It was destruction, it was killing, and it was a fight to the death. Sword chi, iron fists, all the unique skills, and all the martial arts had become the most lethal killing moves. The figures on the screen kept moving, and the cameras dimmed one after another. However, the whole battlefield became more and more desperate. The light and shadow gradually dimmed, but the sword energy became more and more violent. The majestic sword completely tore the space, and all the pictures became blurred. Vaguely, a figure covered in blood was attacking the three opponents in front of him without any regard for anything else. There was no reason, no thought. Only fighting. That was giving up all the violence, with hysterical killing intent. There was no defense, only attack. The dagger of Kunlun City returned to Gu Hanshan's hand. The heavy iron fist. The cold dagger. The huge blade fell on Li Tianlan again and again, and blood kept falling. Li Tianlan didn't dodge at all, and took all the opponent's counterattack head-on. Crazy attack. Hao continued to attack madly. The dagger stabbed into Li Tianlan's body several times. The iron fist hit Li Tianlan's body countless times. The heavy blade of firmament whistled wildly, and chopped toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan didn't care at all, no matter how serious the injury was. Fighting and attacking had become his instinct. He wouldn't stop until he died. In the blurred picture, several people fought from the first floor to the top, and from the top to the bottom. In the suffocating silence, both sides kept bleeding. Li Tianlan's injury was getting worse, but his combat capability didn't decrease at all. Everyone was staring at the picture on the screen, staring at the outcome that might be decided at any second. The heavy sword of firmament rose again with a violent trajectory, and the whole space trembled with the blade. Wang Shengxiao completely changed. He seemed to become as crazy as Li Tianlan. The majestic sword energy wrapped the huge sword, and he chopped toward Li Tianlan again and again. Li Tianlan didn't dodge. The wonderful body movements and the mysterious shadow formula had all disappeared from his body. Only the 24 moves of swordsmanship remained. In the face of the three strongest young experts in Zhongzhou State except for himself, he had the attitude that he would fight to the end even if he died. Kill, kill, kill. Wang Shengxiao's eyes suddenly became extremely frenzied. The heavy and huge sword edge suddenly raised a sword intent that ignored everything. He held the giant sword with both hands, disregarding his own injury, and chopped down with all his strength. The Wang family of Beihai, the domineering sword. It was pure domineering, conceited, and disdainful of everything. The sword intent didn't fluctuate at all. The moment it appeared, it became completely crazy. Boom. The teaching building, which had stood here for many years, finally exploded into pieces under the raging sword chi. This was the most thorough collapse. First, the foundation of the first floor was completely loose. The stone pillars supporting the stairs were shattered. Countless boulders flew out and collapsed from the bottom to the top. The second floor, the third floor. In the smoke and dust all over the sky, the whole teaching building collapsed layer by layer in the raging sword intent. The almost overwhelming ruins smashed down, as if to completely bury the four people inside. Li Tianlan's attack instinctively paused. Ninth secluded impasse. The moment the smoke and dust rose, Jiang Shangyu, whose face was pale, suddenly roared at the top of his voice. Gu Hanshan froze for a moment, and then understood that this was Jiang Shangyu's reminder to him. Without any hesitation, Gu Hanshan unreservedly opened the pseudo-domain that he could barely master now, covering his two teammates and Li Tianlan. The sound of collapse seemed to go far away at the moment when the pseudo-domain was opened. Jiang Shangyu was in the air, and his whole body was completely stretched out in the darkness. His arms, legs, and waist. All the power was fully mobilized by him in the shortest time. The dense sounds of joints cracking kept ringing in Jiang Shangyu's body. Jiang Shangyu's body began to glow. The light was not dazzling, nor was it blue. It was extremely faint, but absolutely distant. Jiang Shangyu raised his arm. His movements were extremely clear, but they were extremely fast. The sound of all the joints was still ringing in his body, and his punch had directly blasted down without reservation. This was the iron fist of the Jiang family, but it had surpassed the unique skill of the Jiang family. He had been in the half-step thundershocking realm for 3 years. Jiang Shangyu's martial arts did not move. He seemed to have done nothing, but he had done too much and gained too much. This punch was the strongest move that concentrated all of Jiang Shangyu's essence, qi and spirit. His own killing move. 10,000 miles of starry sky. The wind of the fist carried an invisible power, vast and mighty. The faint light kept spreading along the trajectory of his attack, and instantly lit up the entire pseudo-domain. The dark pseudo-domain was not in the dark. The sky was full of stars. At this moment, it was not only the number 3 stand that caused a sensation. All over Zhongzhou State, and even all the major forces in the world, all the people who saw this scene were suddenly shocked. In this maneuver, they finally saw what they wanted to see. Maybe this was not what they wanted to see the most, but it was definitely the most valuable. Jiang Shangyu's punch alone made countless people feel that this trip was worthwhile. Because this was Jiang Shangyu's own martial arts. It was completely his own martial arts, which was most suitable for him. When Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan were exploring their own road to the invincible realm with the help of the top inheritance. Without the top inheritance, Jiang Shangyu had been dormant for 3 years, and finally embarked on the most suitable and correct path for him. Few people knew that he actually had the Heavenly King heart. But so what if they didn't know? At this moment, Jiang Shangyu was a real young heavenly son. Because he had his own path. As long as he kept going, the end of this path would definitely be the invincible realm. Wang Shengxiao had the wind and thunder veins. Gu Hanshan had the Heavenly King heart. As long as they grew up, they would definitely enter the invincible realm in the future. And now Jiang Shangyu was the same. The starry sky. This punch was heavy and grand. And of course, it was as vast and amazing as the starry sky. The wind of the fist rushed into the pseudo-domain with great power. The stars lit up one after another. In silence, a huge sword edge lit up in the pseudo-domain. It was the purest light. There was only one point, but it was as vast as the sun and the moon. The point of light lay between the darkness and the stars, floating forward. It was so natural, so clear, but so dreamy and solemn. Heavenly sword. It was not the heavenly sword of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the heavenly sword that belonged to Wang Shengxiao himself. He also found his own path. Although it was only a starting point, it also broke the inherent inheritance of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the most dreamy and dazzling light. It was solemn, vast, and unparalleled. 9th secluded impasse. The starry sky. Heavenly sword. At the moment when the teaching building collapsed, the 3 young heavenly sons made their most powerful attacks and their strongest trump cards at the same time. And the target was Li Tianlan. The wind of the fist was mighty all the way. The stars kept shining. Every ray of starlight was a bolt of lightning. Thousands of thunderbolts bloomed at the same time. And the sacred and solemn sword light of the heavenly sword suddenly spread. The pseudo-domain of the 9th secluded impasse began to twist wildly. There was no amazing destructive power. There was no huge momentum. Everything was silent. But the twisted 9th secluded impasse became darker and quieter. In the absolute silence, there were swords and starlight in the pseudo-domain. This was the real domain. The real domain of the invincible realm. The joint attack of the 3 finally broke through the limit of the thunder-shocking realm, and went straight into the invincible realm, forming the most authentic domain of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan was wrapped in the domain of the invincible realm. He was motionless. He let the starlight fall on him. He let the edge of the heavenly sword pass through his chest. He let the 9th secluded impasse twist and squeeze his body. Bang! His arms were completely blown up in the frenzy of attacks. His arms disappeared. His legs were shattered. His whole body was completely torn into countless pieces. In front of the number 3 stand of the Sky Academy, the forces belonging to the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City had begun to cheer. Wang Tianzong opened his eyes and looked at Gu Xingyun for a moment. Both of them saw a touch of gloomy killing intent in each other's eyes. And near the two, Han Donglu, the founder of Huiting Flourishing Age Fund, had taken out his mobile phone and dialed a number. "Help me draw up an investment contract." After the phone was connected, he said with a chuckle in the cheers, "Okay, Boss Han." On the phone, the staff of the Flourishing Age Fund answered, "What kind of investment is it? How much is it?" "The investment of the special warfare system." "The amount?" Han Donglu thought for a moment and said, 10 billion. This. Even with the scale of the Flourishing Age Fund, such a huge investment still made the staff on the other side hesitate for a while. But she did not express any objection and just said cautiously, Okay, Boss Han, which institution is the investment in? Han Donglu narrowed his eyes and gave his answer with a smile. East Emperor Palace. Mount Dibbing. Emperor Hall. Qin Weibai and Summer Solstice sat opposite each other, like two perfect goddesses, holy, cold, and inviolable. The stack of documents was placed on the tea table between them. A screen was set up in the hall of Emperor Hall. Two perfect women, who were similar in some aspects but not exactly the same, looked at the screen quietly. On the screen was the live broadcast of the final maneuver of the Sky Academy. Qin Weibai watched Li Tianlan's body being completely torn into powder in the real invincible realm. Her eyes were bright and dreamy, and the corners of her mouth were gently raised. She was smiling. For the first time in many years, she smiled so brightly and so happily. That was a kind of undisguised ostentatiousness. She laughed out loud, and the crisp laughter kept echoing in Emperor Hall. Is it funny? Summer Solstice looked at Qin Weibai expressionlessly and said coldly, This is the funniest thing I've ever seen. Ha giggle. Oh haha. Qin Weibai laughed and bent down. A killing intent flashed in Summer Solstice's eyes. But not to Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai seemed to feel Summer Solstice's killing intent. She paused and said with a smile, Jealousy is the original sin. You are all guilty. What about you? Summer Solstice sneered and stared at Qin Weibai's eyes, showing her sharpness. Me. Qin Weibai laughed at herself and said, I am unforgivable. Federal City of Star State. The White House. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State, who had been visiting Star State in recent days, was also watching the maneuver. He saw the three young chosen ones attacking with all their might. He also saw the bodies of the real chosen ones being completely torn apart. President Li Huaqing, who had been tense the whole time, had a smile on his face, and he seemed to be relieved. It's over. He turned around and looked at a middle-aged man in a black suit beside him with a clear smile. The middle-aged man nodded and said, President, when will you return home? I have to finish the work at hand. Li Huaqing smiled and said, Tonight. We will return home overnight. South America. Indian Federation. In a luxurious manner comparable to the presidential mansion, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Qianyan, who had the strength of the invincible realm but had civilized the dark world by stratagem, was also watching the final maneuver. Beside him stood a young man about 30 years old. The young man stared at the screen with a dignified look in his eyes. I didn't expect him to go this far. Jiang Qianyan sighed softly. This man is determined and has become enemies with the Jiang family of South America. Are you sure you can kill him? The young man beside Jiang Qianyan was silent for a while, then slowly shook his head. It's hard, but I will try. Europe. Fog Capital. In the ancient and huge castle complex, a pair of white brother and sister, who could be said to be the most powerful in Europe, were also watching the final maneuver of Zhongzhou State. The man was tall and straight, handsome, meticulous, and had a pair of pure blue eyes that seemed to contain a peaceful wisdom and tranquility, in addition to the depth of his deep blue eyes. Compared with the man, the woman in the golden dress beside him was extremely languid. This was a woman who was powerful enough to make people not dare to guess her age by appearance alone. Mature, coquettish, seductive, and lazy. Yet, there was an invisible sharpness that could take one's soul away. She looked more like a mixed race, with black hair and a slender figure. The most attractive thing was her eyes. They were the purest and most dazzling golden pupils, not pale gold, but the purest gold, deep and quiet. She lay on the sofa and watched the maneuver quietly. Suddenly she chuckled and said, Is this the little guy supported by Samsara Palace and the Lin clan? I'm afraid Tianzong is going to have a headache. No wonder he contacted me a few days ago to borrow the murderous weapon. I don't know if he wants to deal with this little guy or the Lin clan and Samsara Palace. Neither of them is easy to deal with. She spoke in perfect Chinese. You want to lend it to her? The man beside her raised his eyebrows, his voice gentle and calm. I can't say no to that man. The woman giggled, not frivolous but enchanting. She suddenly thought of something. Do we have a lot of cooperation with the Lin clan? I won't interfere with your decision. And you don't want to interfere with the family business. Business is business. I have a pleasant cooperation with the Lin clan. The man shook his head with a smile. It's boring. I don't care about your business. Tianzong didn't ask me to do anything. The woman curled her rosy little mouth. You and Tianzong? The man hesitated a little and finally said, we haven't contacted each other for many years, right? Or can't let it go? Why should I let it go? The woman asked faintly. The man sighed softly and shook his head. You have no chance. All Tianzong's attention is on summer solstice. You should have known that it would end like this. What chance do you have? The woman frowned. Summer solstice is also. Then you have no chance. The man's tone was firm. The woman suddenly sat up and screamed angrily. William, you're meddling too much. She was neither ugly nor sweet when she was angry. Only a kind of frightening majesty. I'm your brother. William shrugged. So is Wang Tianzong. You're my brother. The woman laughed. But Tianzong. Our grandfather's 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 father and Tianzong's ancestors were brothers. Their relationship is so far away that he is not my brother. I want him to be my man. William looked confused. The string of tongue-twister grandfather represented a distant enough blood relationship, but it also made him confused. My Chinese is not very good. William smiled bitterly. All right. The woman shrugged. I mean, my business has nothing to do with you. William whistled. Then you can lend him the murderous weapon, or you can go and help him in person. The murderous weapon is already on the way. As for me, I have my own business. The woman shook her head. Have lunch with me at noon. I have a guest at noon. William looked at his watch with some embarrassment. The woman raised her eyebrows. I'm going to have lunch with the Queen. William looked helpless. The Queen. In the knowledge of most Englishmen, there was naturally only one Queen. I'm also the Queen, okay? The woman said angrily. William laughed and said nothing more. The woman put on her high heels and turned directly. I'm leaving. William waved his hand casually, and did not get up to see her off. He just watched his sister leave. He did not lie. He did have lunch with the Queen of England at noon. But his sister did not lie either. She was indeed the Queen. One was the Queen of England. And she was the Queen of the entire Europe. The Queen of Shadows of the Shadow Throne, a super dark force in Europe. Grand Duke Irene King Tong Wang Rothschild. William thought of the murderous weapon that was about to reach the Wang family of Beihai, and his eyes refocused on the maneuver on the screen. What followed was destined to be a picture that some people wanted to see, but some people did not want to see. He thought of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. He suddenly felt a little funny. In every corner of the world, people were paying attention to the maneuver of Zhongzhou State and Li Tianlan. Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu were also watching Li Tianlan. The real invincible domain was constantly twisting. Li Tianlan's body was torn into pieces. After the strongest blow, the aura of the three people continued to weaken. But Gu Hanshan, who controlled the ninth secluded impasse to tear Li Tianlan, was laughing. He laughed wildly and proudly. The old enemy who had been pressing on his heart since he appeared was dead. There would be no Li family in Zhongzhou State in the future. Only Kunlun City. How could he not laugh? The wild laughter became louder and sharper. Gu Hanshan's face was distorted, and he did not hide his laughter. Jiang Shangyu was silent. Wang Shengxiao was silent. He quietly watched Li Tianlan's body being torn apart little by little in his sight, and he suddenly felt a little melancholy and confused. Sizzle. A subtle sound suddenly fell into Wang Shengxiao's ears. Wang Shengxiao froze for a moment. Sizzle. The sound continued to ring, and it was extremely clear in Gu Hanshan's arrogant laughter. It was as if someone had used their hands to gently tear apart a piece of paper or a dry leaf. It was gentle, yet cruel. Li Tianlan's body continued to shatter in the domain. But Wang Shengxiao suddenly raised his head and stared at Li Tianlan in the shattering. Gu Hanshan's laughter also disappeared. Jiang Shangyu also raised his head. In the sight of the three, Li Tianlan's body shattered faster and faster. But he was still calm and silent. Under this kind of shattering, he had no pain, no sound, and no bloodstains. No bloodstains. Gu Hanshan, whose face changed dramatically, took a step forward subconsciously. Snap! In the subtle sound, Li Tianlan's body disappeared completely. It was not a complete shattering disappearance. Instead, it suddenly disappeared in everyone's sight. The domain had completely dissipated. The sun shone down again. Wang Shengxiao stared at the place where Li Tianlan had stood. There was no bloodstain or body there. Under the sunlight, there was only a single leaf that was still green, but had all of its water content sucked out, drifting down lightly. The leaf carried a faint and negligible sword intent, which made people feel desperate. The three young heavenly sons couldn't say a word for a while. Their hearts were extremely cold. They didn't speak. But someone spoke. It was so quiet and indifferent. You three. The voice sounded softly behind them, leisurely and quiet. Did you have fun? Bang! Accompanying this sound was an incomparably deep and loud heartbeat. The three young heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State looked back in disbelief. On a tree not far away in their sight, Li Tianlan stood there quietly, holding a branch in his hand. There was no madness in his eyes, only tranquility. His clothes were neat and new, so clean that they seemed to have never been touched. Unscathed, Wang Shengxiao opened his mouth, and a mouthful of blood gushed out of his throat. He choked and coughed. Li Tianlan didn't look at them. He just looked up at the sky quietly. In the dead silence on the number 3 stand, Li Tianlan's face was reflected on the big screen. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyan stared at that face in silence. Li Tianlan seemed to be looking at them. The sun shone down warm and hot, bright and clear. That was the sky in Li Tianlan's eyes. It was clear, but there were still shadows. Chapter 381. Li Tianlan looked at the sky. The three young chosen ones looked at Li Tianlan. This was a dead, stiff, almost frozen picture. Large tracts of jungle were broken into powder, and the flat ground became a pool in the raging sword intent. There was still dust rising from the ruins of the collapsed teaching buildings and warehouses. It was a blur. Li Tianlan stood quietly on the top of a tree, bathing in the sun and holding a branch. The green branch seemed to have lost a leaf, but the other leaves were still warm, with the water stains left by the night rain and morning dew. They were very clean. The branch and the person were very clean. The fierce battle that affected everyone's mind and the eyes of the world seemed to have come to an end, but it also seemed to have just begun. He held the branch and stood casually on the top of the tree. It was clean and fresh, as if he was taking a walk in this battlefield. He looked at the sky. The three chosen ones, covered in dust and blood, looked at him. There was no anger, sorrow, or self-mockery in the silent and frozen picture. All the emotions seemed to be completely frozen with the blood. There was only dullness left. He stood at the peak of power, looked down on them, broke the rules, lost friendship, and did whatever it took to eliminate the threat in the future. In the end, he risked his life and was injured. When he should have been completely relaxed, he found that he just destroyed a fallen leaf, a sword intent, and an incarnation that the other party threw into the sky. What was his mood? Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated expression. He was not unfamiliar with such a method, but he was absolutely not familiar with it. Li Tianlan, who was destroyed by them together, was not an incarnation. It was sword intent. It was the purest sword intent that belonged to Li Tianlan. The sword intent had been in their sight all the time. The sword intent did not deceive their eyes, but the pure sword intent twisted the void. The sword intent finally twisted into Li Tianlan's appearance in the void. It was an extremely powerful and pure sword intent. What the three of them saw was all an illusion after the distortion of the void. In fact, it was a fallen leaf and a sword intent. It was like a magic trick. A magic trick that only those at the peak of the invincible realm were qualified to play. Li Tianlan's combat capability was naturally no match for those at the peak of the invincible realm. But his vision, his knowledge, his thoughts, and even his will were close to the most mysterious and powerful domain. Wang Shengxiao's path was just a prototype. Jiang Shangyu's road had just begun. But the road in front of Li Tianlan had already led to the highest place. He was standing on that path, moving forward. All of Jiang Shangyu's complacency completely disappeared. Looking at Li Tianlan in front of him, his dull eyes became dim and even a little desperate. Gu Hanshan trembled all over. His trembling was extremely obvious, as if he was convulsing. He used all the strength in his body to hold the dagger that he had used to stare at the fallen leaf not long ago. The blade of the dagger trembled along with his arm, cutting through the air. His face was completely twisted. After a moment of sluggishness, his heart was filled with astonishment, disbelief, and disbelief. In the end, it turned into a burning jealousy. How could the remaining member of the Li family, an ant, have come this far? What did he rely on to reach this step? The vision of the peak invincible realm, and the combat capability of the invincible realm. Why wasn't he the one who could do this? Who was Li Tianlan? What right does he have? Gu Hanshan gritted his teeth and stared at Li Tianlan, who was unscathed. Thinking of the fierce battle just now, he suddenly felt that everything about him was a joke. His eyes became sinister with jealousy, and finally turned into a surging killing intent and a little timid resentment. Puff! Wang Shengxiao spat out a mouthful of blood again. His eyes were already a little dizzy and blurred, but his will became more and more sober. The scenes of the battle just now replayed in his mind, and every scene seemed to be a merciless mockery of them. He didn't understand why Li Tianlan was so crazy, nor did he understand why the branch in his hand disappeared under Chen Mashue's sky-killing sword intent, nor did he understand why Li Tianlan had no sense at all. It turned out that the truth of everything was just because it was just a sword intent condensed by a fallen leaf. No matter how pure the sword intent was sword intent. Without life, it naturally had no thoughts and reason. The three young chosen ones of Zhongzhou state joined hands to fight against a fallen leaf. It was thrilling and soul-stirring, and they finally won. A fallen leaf. Such a beautiful story might have already spread all over the dark world, right? Wang Shengxiao raised the corner of his mouth. He laughed. The chosen one of Beihai, who was destined to shoulder the Wang family of Beihai for the next few decades, trembled with laughter. His laughter was inexplicable and full of self-mockery. But he was not disappointed. Not at all. When Jiang Shangyu was a little desperate, and when Gu Hanshan was full of jealousy, the helplessness and melancholy in Wang Shengxiao's eyes completely disappeared with the appearance of Li Tianlan. Flames flashed in his eyes, and eventually became a wildfire that burned everything. He, who was the most seriously injured, was the first to raise the firmament in his hand. The huge blade pointed at Li Tianlan from afar, and the fighting intent soared. At this moment, there was no timidity, jealousy, or loss in Wang Shengxiao's eyes, only firmness and madness. Li Tianlan withdrew his gaze from the sky and looked at Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao stood straight, holding the sword, and his figure was as straight as a javelin. I lost today. Wang Shengxiao's eyes became more and more frenzied, but his tone was calm and a little humble. I'm sincerely convinced. He took a step forward with his sword, looked at Li Tianlan and whispered, but the maneuver is not over. If you don't die today, I'm willing to chase after your back for many years to come. There was a flash of light in Li Tianlan's eyes. Wang Shengxiao's figure was reflected in his quiet and deep pupils so clear. This was Wang Shengxiao. He lost the maneuver, became a laughingstock, and was seriously injured. But compared to Gu Hanshan, who completely lost his composure, and Jiang Shangyu, who was in a mess, the chosen one of Beihai did not lose the bearing of the Wang family of Beihai after all. He still dared to fight and draw his sword. In the stands, Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became calm. He looked at Wang Shengxiao's firm and crazy eyes on the screen, and the corners of his mouth lifted imperceptibly. He had expected this situation. In Linen, he had already vaguely perceived the height of Li Tianlan's martial arts. But before the maneuver began, he really did not expect that there was such a means to dominate the battlefield with a green leaf. That was the domain belonging to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan's technique was very jerky, and there were too many loopholes. In the eyes of any invincible realm expert, or even a half-step invincible realm expert, such a technique was ridiculous. But it also meant that Li Tianlan had found the way to the peak. A green leaf fought with 3 young chosen ones. Such an ending could be described as extremely miserable. But in his eyes, his son didn't lose in a bad way. At least, he did not lose his faith, and he still had the fighting desire in his heart. Martial arts was like climbing a mountain, crossing the sea, and ascending to the sky. Who could sing all the way? Failure was actually not terrible. It actually took more courage to admit failure and be willing to chase after the opponent's back. Wang Tianzong's palm stroked the famous sword. Listened to the sea beside him. His eyes gradually changed from calm to cold. It became cold. Li Tianlan stood on the treetop and slowly turned around. His movements were slow, but his every move affected everyone's nerves. His eyes swept over the sword in Wang Shengxiao's hand, ignored the sword energy on the blade, and finally stopped on Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan's expression was still distorted, and he even forgot to hide the jealousy deep in his eyes. Do you like to laugh? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and took the initiative to ask. So humorous? Gu Hanshan froze for a moment, and his face turned purple in an instant. He recalled his wild and carefree laughter as he tore that green leaf apart. That was simply the most humiliating moment of his life. What did you say? Gu Hanshan flew into a rage. Li Tianlan's eyes were still calm, and his tone was indifferent. Such a temperament is really a disgrace to the heavenly king heart. It also insults the 4 words of the young chosen ones. Kunlun City. Ah. It was impossible for his voice to reach the stands, but it easily fell into the ears of everyone present. Gu Hanshan, who was in a mess, suddenly had red eyes. That was not the unyielding fighting desire like Wang Shengxiao's. Instead, it was a kind of anger because his scar had been opened. He instinctively took a step forward, but then stopped where he was. Kunlun City, get into formation. His face was completely red, but he did not dare to do it himself. Instead, he roared. Everyone who participated in the maneuver had arrived at the scene. The sword energy in the final hit formation that Kunlun City had prepared for a long time was mighty. This was a sword formation without a so-called core. But without a core, it did not mean that there could not be a core when conditions permitted. Gu Yulan, the personal disciple of Gu Qianchuan and the founder of Jilei Peak, was standing in the formation at this time. Gu Yulan, who had not fully recovered from her injury, was pale, but she bit her lip tightly and raised the sword in her hand. In an instant, the killing formation, which was formed by more than 50 elites, exploded with a majestic sword intent. Li Tianlan slightly raised his eyebrows. His figure trembled gently on the branch. Without a sound, his entire figure continued to fade, and finally disappeared under the bright and beautiful sunlight. The sword energy of the final hit sword formation was surging and becoming more and more majestic. Gu Hanshan suddenly turned around and glanced around. Behind you. Jiang Shangyu suddenly raised his voice. Gu Hanshan quickly turned around. There was only sunlight, only the pool, only the sword formation, only Wang Shengxiao and Jiang Shangyu in his sight. Behind you. A cold chill instantly swept through Gu Hanshan's whole body. He turned around again. The dense forest appeared in his sight, but Li Tianlan was still nowhere to be seen. A great danger seemed to be lurking behind him like a shadow, but he could not see anything. He was turning around. Still nothing. What are you looking for? When the voice sounded, a hand was placed on Gu Hanshan's shoulder at the same time. All the hair on Gu Hanshan's body stood on end. With a roar, the sword intent that had been accumulated all over his body instantly flew in all directions. But the hand on his shoulder was still stable. The palm slightly tightened. In the case of serious injury, a force that Gu Hanshan could not resist directly pressed on his shoulder. Gu Hanshan roared fiercely. Bang! His body directly knelt on the ground. Bang! In the dull sound, before Gu Hanshan had time to feel humiliated, a foot directly kicked him in the back of his heart. Red blood gushed out of his mouth like a fountain. Gu Hanshan's body directly flew dozens of meters away. Gu Hanshan endured the pain and climbed up as fast as he could. His eyes were cold and gloomy. There was nothing in his sight. Behind you. In the shrill reminder, Gu Hanshan reacted completely by instinct. He clenched the dagger and directly swept it backward. His body turned extremely fast, but he still did not see Li Tianlan. He only saw a hand. A hand clenched his arm and pulled it very gently. Ah! The severe pain made Gu Hanshan roar suddenly. His physical strength was as fragile as a piece of paper in that hand. His arm was forcibly broken in the pull. The dagger in his hand fell out of control and was immediately caught by Li Tianlan. The blade flashed with cold light in the sun, with a dark red color. Without the slightest hesitation, Li Tianlan stabbed the dagger into Gu Hanshan's back steadily. Blood splashed. The dagger was stabbed in, and then pulled out violently. Li Tianlan kicked Gu Hanshan out again. Li Tianlan. In pain and shame, Gu Hanshan's whole face and even his voice became distorted. At this moment, he finally remembered a secret unique skill of the Li family. It was the legendary unique skill recorded in the Invincible Manual of Map of God of War. Night walking. This could be said to be the top, but also the most difficult body movement to practice in the dark world. It was also an almost invincible unique skill. It was good at chasing and even better at close-range assassination. In the battle of the same realm, once night walking took the lead, the enemy could never see his position. Such a body movement seemed to take advantage of the blind spot and absolute speed. But in fact, night walking pursued instinct and the grasp of the details of the enemy's body. Instinct was the fastest. This was a kind of body movement that used instinct to always keep pace with the enemy's movements. When practiced to the peak, once he appeared behind the enemy in the battle, he would always be behind the enemy until the enemy died. Gu Hanshan had the Heavenly King heart. At his peak, his will was absolutely focused. It could be said that he was the biggest nemesis of night walking. But now his mind was in a mess. Under Li Tianlan's attack, he had no power to fight back. Using the body movement that was most restrained by the Heavenly King heart to tease Gu Hanshan was the greatest humiliation to Kunlun City and Gu Hanshan. The dagger pierced Gu Hanshan's body. Gu Hanshan endured the sharp pain, tried to contract the muscles in his waist, and controlled the blood from gushing out. Li Tianlan stood in the sun with the dagger in his hand. He smiled softly. You've played enough. Now it's my turn. In the final maneuver that day, the world should not only see his sword. They should also see the embarrassment of the other young heavenly sons in Zhongzhou State. There was still a lot of time. Li Tianlan only intended to play slowly. His eyes swept over Jiang Shangyu, Gu Hanshan, and Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao still maintained the posture of the giant sword. Li Tianlan's eyes swept over. He slowly closed his eyes. Li Tianlan's pupils constricted quietly. In his perception, the moment Wang Shengxiao closed his eyes, he was no longer alive. Under the sun, he was like a statue of flesh and blood. His vitality was disappearing. But the sword energy around Wang Shengxiao was unprecedentedly violent. The sword energy kept rising. It surpassed the previous heaven-killing stroke and the heavenly sword in the domain of the three people's joint attack. He stood in silence, and there was only peace in him. His heart was calm, his breathing was steady, and his will was focused. Wang Shengxiao was completely immersed in the sword intent. Failure came first and honor came later. In life, there were always occasions when one could not take a step back even if he had to give everything. Li Tianlan ignored Wang Shengxiao. Killing people's hearts. He couldn't kill people. But if there was a chance to completely destroy their minds, Li Tianlan would not hesitate to do so. He held the branch in one hand and casually threw the dagger to Gu Hanshan with the other, saying expressionlessly, "Continue." It was not Gu Hanshan who continued. As Li Tianlan's voice fell, Jiang Shangyu rushed up without hesitation. The so-called cooperation and the so-called future completely disappeared from Jiang Shangyu's mind at this moment. His essence, qi, and spirit were completely concentrated, his will was focused, and his heart was pure. Li Tianlan said he would play slowly. But he did not want Li Tianlan to play slowly. In the entire Zhongzhou state, under the gaze of countless forces all over the world, Jiang Shangyu did not want Li Tianlan to press him to the ground and ravage him. He was not born in the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, which were the super forces at the peak of martial arts, and he did not have the top inheritance. But he had his pride. Thousands of miles of starry sky. With Jiang Shangyu as the center, the sunlight in the nearby space dimmed instantly. The starlight lit up in pieces. Jiang Shangyu's figure stepped over the land and leaped into the sky. The whole earth shook with a loud bang. The faint starlight suddenly burst out. The stars were bright. The starlight that occupied the whole space attracted each other and turned into thunderbolts. The thunderbolts gathered on Jiang Shangyu's arm. Under the dazzling light, a large amount of thunderbolts condensed into a fist that was tens of meters long. Jiang Shangyu roared wildly, clenched the fist made of thunderbolts, and smashed it down hard. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm without any fluctuation. He looked at Jiang Shangyu, who was constantly accumulating power in the air. He watched the huge shadow of the huge fist that traversed tens of meters of space fall. The branch in his hand hung on the ground. He raised one hand. There was no starlight, no night, no thunderbolts, no sword energy. A sword was a sword, and a fist was a fist. His figure was extremely small under the shadow of the fist that was tens of meters long. But at this moment, Li Tianlan exuded a kind of momentum that could suppress everything. Under the shadow of the fist, he punched into the sky with the power of the sea. The air within a radius of 100 meters suddenly twisted along with his punch. The space exploded in the compression with a harsh sonic boom. The flickering but seemingly endless starlight was extinguished in an instant. The sun fell again. It shone on the shadow of the fist made of thunderbolts in the void. Li Tianlan's punch directly hit the shadow of the fist. Boom. In the dull crash, a large area of land between Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu continued to crack. The flat ground continued to rise and fall with the appearance of the cracks. Smoke and dust rose, filled the sky, and rushed into the woods like a gust of wind. Blood gushed out of Jiang Shangyu's mouth and his arm. His whole body trembled violently, and his aura fluctuated constantly. Li Tianlan didn't move. Under the collision of the two huge forces, his clothes and hair didn't even lift a little bit. Jiang Shangyu gritted his teeth. The violent power twisted the air. There seemed to be a thick wall in front of him blocking his way. The incredible destructive force pressed on his whole body. His bones began to tear, and his muscles were completely deformed. In the space where he couldn't move an inch, he raised his other arm again. Another punch. Another vast starry sky. The starlight quietly lit up in the storm of power. Under the sun, the darkness came quietly. Gu Hanshan, who managed to calm down, followed Jiang Shangyu and attacked with all his strength. Ninth secluded impasse. Eighth supreme sword dance. Extinction of 5 elements. 3 elements final kill. Gu Hanshan seemed to have become a sword energy ejector in an instant. The dense sword intent kept whistling out with the vibration of his body. A large number of sword wheels and whistling sword shadows all rushed into the pseudo-domain in an instant. They combined with the starry sky and assimilated with the darkness. The vast starry sky and the ninth secluded impasse blended with each other. But Wang Shengxiao's sword was missing. Wang Shengxiao still held his sword and closed his eyes. The sword chi gathered crazily and covered his entire body. The sword energy was getting stronger and stronger. A large area of space fluctuated around him, undulating like stormy waves. There seemed to be a sea in the air around Wang Shengxiao. The heavy sword firmament was lifted up little by little. It was extremely heavy, but he seemed to have forgotten everything around him. He didn't move or speak, and he didn't draw his sword. It was Gu Yulan who drew her sword. It was the final kill sword formation composed of more than 50 elites whose realm was at the peak of the ice-condensing realm. In the domain, the starlight lit up. On the edge of the woods, Gu Yulan, who had accumulated the sword intent of the final kill sword formation to the limit, suddenly let out an extremely high-pitched scream. The silver mask that she had always worn on her face directly exploded under the constantly gathering sword energy. Her long hair fluttered in the sword intent. In the whistling sword intent, everyone saw her lineup. It was an extremely beautiful face, very seductive, but a little childish and cold. In the soaring sword intent, her figure went straight up into the sky. with the sword intent condensed by dozens of people and her own strongest blow. She held the sword with both hands and rushed straight to Li Tianlan. This sword seemed light, but it was extremely strange and fast. Gu Yolan's figure broke through the air. Her figure was like a goshawk. She held the sword with both hands, and the tip of the sword lit up with a blurry light. It was like thunder, flame, ice, flying snow, and everything. All the light eventually became extremely fleeting. The light on the tip of the sword grew brighter and brighter. It seemed to be a sword that cut through the space. Wherever Gu Yulan passed, the whole space was fragmented and mottled, turning into a dark and undefeated color. She rushed into the pseudo-domain, into the darkness and starlight. Without hesitation. Behind Gu Yulan, more than 50 elites of the final kill sword formation fell to the ground. Dozens of remaining members of the 6 teams rushed to Li Tianlan at the same time. Everyone had used all their strength. The young heavenly sun, the majestic sword formation, and the scattered elites. Charge, all of you charge. Li Tianlan still stood where he was. The final kill sword formation made up for the heavenly sword. Everything seemed to begin to change toward the real domain again. Li Tianlan laughed. This domain tore apart one of his sword intent. Now that he was standing here, what was the meaning of this so-called domain? Gu Yulan stabbed directly at his chest with unparalleled sword light. Li Tianlan raised his palm again. He clenched his fist. He held the branch in his other hand. There was no sword intent. Just the palm. Just the power. But this time he really did his best. Crack. There was a clear sound of breaking in the silent pseudo-domain. Li Tianlan's palm didn't seem to be fast, but it just appeared in front of Gu Yulan. The starlight and the pseudo-domain were constantly torn apart the moment he raised his palm. The sword light shone on Li Tianlan's calm and deep pupils. His eyes were so quiet, so gentle, but so majestic. Gu Yulan's body froze in the air. With the sword intent of dozens of people and the strongest blow, she came to Li Tianlan and tried her best to scream and stab forward, but the long sword could no longer move forward. Li Tianlan pinched the blade with one hand. The violent sword energy hit the power storm in Li Tianlan's palm and kept trembling, but it couldn't move forward at all. The sword light, the starlight, the pseudo-domain, and the power storm. At this moment, all the destructive forces collapsed around Li Tianlan, whistling and flying. Under the flickering light, he stood quietly, with his own general trend and peace. This was the picture he left to the world. But it was so desperate for the enemies who besieged him. Li Tianlan pinched the blade of Gu Yolan's sword and pulled it gently. He flicked his fingers. His fingers touched the edge of the sword, producing a crisp sound. The sword energy of the final hit sword formation was completely violent. The bright blade was completely broken in Li Tianlan's hands. The front end of the blade rushed to Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu with sharp sword energy and heavy power. Gu Yulan, holding the dagger, was swaying in the pseudo-domain. Li Tianlan's voice was very soft, but it was indescribably loud in the pseudo-domain. Goodbye. As he spoke, he closed his fingers. A punch. The broken pseudo-domain shattered in an instant. The power as vast as heaven and earth burst out under Li Tianlan's punch, like a mountain or a sea. The ground where Li Tianlan was completely collapsed. The pseudo-domain disappeared, the starlight disappeared, and the sword energy disappeared. There was no light between heaven and earth, only power. The heavy power completely blew away Gu Yulan. And at the same time, dozens of idle elites who besieged him were blown away. On the big screen of the Sky Academy, Gu Yulan, who bore the brunt, was torn into powder by this punch. One figure after another flew back under the raging tide of power. The majestic power shook the sky and never stopped. Countless people and countless swords danced chaotically in the tyrannical power. They gathered in one place and rushed out of the collapsed ground, bringing with them a rain of blood that filled the sky as they charged into the forest. The members who formed the final hit sword formation in the woods were directly rolled up. Nearly 100 elites and nearly 100 swords tumbled powerlessly in the air and rushed to the depths of the woods for hundreds of meters. The incredible power swept all the way with people and swords. Countless trees in the entire forest collapsed and collapsed. Leaves and blood fluttered at the same time. In an instant, the entire dense forest was cleared out, leaving a straight passage of more than 200 meters long. Li Tianlan's figure floated in the air, expressionless. He was so quiet that he was almost nothingness. But under the sun, he floated quietly like an invincible devil in everyone's eyes. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Hanshan, who were forced back by a broken sword, trembled at the same time. They looked at the branch in Li Tianlan's hand. They looked at the pure punch. Their eyes clearly showed that they were on the verge of collapsing. Everyone stared at this incredible punch in a daze. Even Gu Xingyun's eyes were full of astonishment. How? His tone was a little difficult. How is it possible? He knew that Li Tianlan had wind and thunder veins. So in the battle between him and Gu Qianchuan said that Li Tianlan's power was incredible, but he didn't care. But this punch had gone beyond the scope of great power, at least beyond the scope of wind and thunder veins. Can wind and thunder veins do this? Gu Xingyun suddenly turned his head and looked at Wang Tianzong subconsciously. I can't. Wang Tianzong nodded. His son Wang Shengxiao also had wind and thunder veins. But even if his wind and thunder veins evolved to the highest level, it was difficult to do this with pure power. Wang Shengxiao's wind and thunder veins were difficult to achieve, whether it was strength or the speed that Li Tianlan approached Gu Hanshan. In his impression, there was only one person in the invincible realm who could do this with one punch. His disciple, Dijiang with double thunder veins. Li Tianlan also did this. What did this mean? His physique has improved. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and said faintly, this is double wind and thunder veins. 2 chapters of about 8,000 words in a row. I want to ask for a monthly ticket. Ahem, brothers, please support me crazily. The word crazily support is really good. That you're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.